This is the first part of What If Deku Becomes Prison King? Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Izuku Midoriya walked through the crowded hallways of UA High School, his mind filled with plans for the day. He was focused on improving his control over One for All, determined to live up to the legacy that All Might had entrusted him with. However, something felt off. A sense of unease settled over him as he approached his classroom. When he opened the door, he was met not by his classmates but by two familiar figures standing in the middle of the empty room: Aizawa and All Might. Both wore serious expressions, their postures tense. Aizawa stated that they needed to talk, his voice lacking its usual gruffness. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were sharp and seemed to carry a hint of sadness. Midoriya's heart sank as he realized this wasn't a normal conversation. He asked if something was wrong, his voice faltering slightly as he stepped into the room. The door clicked shut behind him, and he felt an invisible weight settle over him. All Might stepped forward, his face solemn. He acknowledged how much Midoriya had given to carry One for All but explained that, after much deliberation, they had made a decision. Midoriya's heart raced as he struggled to find his voice, asking what the decision was about. In an instant, Aizawa's capture weapon flicked out, wrapping around Midoriya's arms and binding him tightly. Midoriya's eyes widened in shock. Aizawa's gaze remained fixed as he expressed his regret, stating that this was necessary. All Might's face was filled with sorrow as he approached Midoriya, his hand glowing faintly with the power of One for All. He explained that, for the safety of everyone, One for All must be returned. Midoriya's heart shattered as he struggled against Aizawa's hold, pleading with All Might that he had worked so hard and done everything he could. But his pleas were met with silence. All Might placed a hand on Midoriya's shoulder, his expression heavy with regret, and told him that sometimes hard choices had to be made. With that, All Might took a hair from Midoriya, transferring One for All and drawing the quirk out from his body. Midoriya felt a surge of energy leaving him, a deep emptiness settling within him as the power he had worked so hard to master slipped away. The process was swift, yet it left him feeling hollow and powerless. As All Might stepped back, Midoriya slumped forward, held up only by Aizawa's binding. He whispered why this was happening, tears streaming down his face, asking why they would take it away. All Might's voice was barely a whisper as he expressed his sorrow and hoped that one day Midoriya would understand. Aizawa released him, and Midoriya collapsed to the ground, his body weak and his spirit broken. Aizawa and All Might exchanged a somber glance before they left the room, leaving Midoriya alone with the silence and the weight of their decision. As Midoriya lay on the cold floor of the empty classroom, struggling to process the devastating loss of One for All, he heard the faint sound of footsteps approaching. He looked up, his vision blurred by tears, only to see Nizu standing at the doorway, flanked by police officers. The small principal's expression was unusually serious, devoid of his typical cheerful demeanor. Nizu began, calmly but firmly, that the decision extended beyond just removing One for All from him. Midoriya's eyes widened, dread pooling in his stomach as he asked what Nizu meant. Nizu stepped forward, his small figure casting a large shadow in the doorway. He explained that, given recent events and for the safety of the public, it was necessary for Midoriya to be placed in custody. The police officers behind Nizu stepped forward, and Midoriya could feel their intent, a chill running down his spine. He instinctively tried to back away, feeling powerless without One for All. He stammered, filled with desperation, asking Nizu what he had done wrong and why this was happening to him. Nizu's face softened briefly as he explained that this was not easy for any of them, but they believed this was the best course of action to ensure the safety of everyone, including himself. Tartarus had the resources to monitor and help him. The words hit Midoriya like a punch to the gut. The reality of what was happening sank in as the officers approached him, placing H&D CFFS around his wrists. The cold metal against his skin felt surreal, each click echoing in his mind. He cried out, struggling weakly against their hold, insisting that he only wanted to be a hero and help people. The officers ignored his pleas, lifting him to his feet. Aizawa and All Might stood in the background, their faces a mix of regret and sorrow, but neither spoke. Midoriya's heart broke as he looked at his former mentor, who now wouldn't even meet his gaze. The walk out of the school was quiet and filled with a heavy atmosphere. Midoriya could feel the stares of other students peering from the windows, their faces a mixture of confusion and fear. Whispers began as they watched their classmate, the once hopeful hero, being escorted by the police. As they reached the school's gates, a prison transport vehicle waited, its dark metal surface cold and unwelcoming. The officers guided Midoriya inside, locking him in the heavily secured cell meant to transport criminals to Tartarus prison. Sitting alone in the back of the vehicle, Midoriya's mind raced with a torrent of emotions: confusion, fear, betrayal, and heartbreak. He had lost everything in the span of a few short moments. One for all, his dreams of being a hero, and the trust of those he had looked up to. As the vehicle began to move, Midoriya could only sit in silence, staring at the metal walls around him. He felt hollow, as though a part of him had been ripped away, leaving nothing but an emptiness that he wasn't sure he could ever fill. The gates of Tartarus loomed ahead, a dark fortress that now stood as his prison. His journey as a hero had come to an end, replaced by a nightmare he could never have imagined. Weeks later, Midoriya was taken to court, malnourished and barely able to walk. The courtroom was tense, packed with reporters, heroes, and onlookers who had once celebrated Izuku Midoriya as the symbol of the next generation. Now they stared at him in chains, eyes filled with contempt. The boy who once bore the weight of the world's hope now looked broken, a ghost of his former self. His green eyes, once so full of determination, were hollow, and his hands were shackled, ensuring no sudden movements. His mother, Inko Midoriya, sat in the front row, clutching a crumpled handkerchief, tears streaming down her face. She appeared small and defeated, her body trembling as she watched her son, the boy she had raised to be a hero, confront the relentless judgment of a harsh system. The prosecutor, a stern man with sharp eyes and a cruel twist to his lips, paced in front of the jury. In his hands he held Izuku's journal, waving it as if it were a weapon. He sneered, declaring that this was not just a journal but a detailed analysis of every hero and quirk at UA High, complete with weaknesses, strategies, and combat notes. He accused Izuku of being a traitor rather than a hero in training. A murmur of shock rippled through the room, and Izuku winced under the weight of every accusing gaze. He attempted to speak, but his voice barely rose above a whisper, expressing that he had only wanted to understand and be prepared. The prosecutor scoffed, dripping with disdain, questioning what Izuku was preparing for betrayal or handing over valuable information to villains. He emphasized that no true hero would need to know how to bring down their friends. Izuku's fists clenched, anger bubbling beneath his despair. He insisted that his intentions were to protect them, but no one listened. The crowd seemed deaf to his words, and his former classmates observed in cold silence. One by one, they took the stand, delivering their testimonies like final nails in his coffin. Bakugo, his former friend and rival, shook his head, sadness in his eyes, expressing that he no longer recognized Izuku. He stated that Izuku had fooled them all. Todoroki followed, his gaze as icy as ever, flatly stating that they had trusted Izuku, who had betrayed that trust. Uraraka, with tears pooling in her eyes, spoke with a cracked voice, revealing that she thought she knew him but felt like he had become a stranger after seeing the journal. Each friend's words pierced Izuku's heart, deeper than any physical wound could. He glanced at his mother, who was barely holding herself together. She looked at him with a pained expression, mouthing her belief in him, but her support offered little comfort against the tidal wave of condemnation. Finally, the judge called for silence as the president of the Hero Public Safety Commission took the stage. Her expression was unreadable as she held a document in her hands, the official paperwork that would strip Izuku of his hero status. She announced that, in light of the evidence and under her authority, she was revoking his status as a hero. From that day forward, he would no longer be recognized as part of the hero system. The courtroom fell into stunned silence, the finality of her words hanging in the air. Izuku's face was expressionless, yet his mind reeled. Stripped of one for all, abandoned by his friends, and now declared a villain, It felt as if every part of him was being erased. The president's gaze hardened as she continued, stating that he was sentenced to life in Tartarus prison for the security of society. At that moment, Inko stood up, her voice breaking as she cried out, pleading that her son was not a villain and had only tried to help and understand. She pushed forward, attempting to reach him, but the guards held her back as she fought against them. Her cries fell on deaf ears. Izuku was already being led away, his head hung low. The courtroom's voices grew distant as his mother's sobs echoed, marking the final sound of his old life slipping away. As he walked down the hallway, shackled and powerless, a dark realization dawned upon him. They had taken everything from him, his power, his dreams, and even his mother's love was powerless to save him now. He felt like a shell, a hollow version of the boy who had once believed in justice and heroes. In that void, a spark of something darker ignited within him. If they wanted to see him as a villain, if they wanted to cage him as a monster, he would show them just how wrong they were. They would regret the day they cast him aside. Izuku was pulled out of the courtroom in H&D CFFS, flanked by officers on either side. His head was lowered, but his eyes burned with anger, simmering beneath a surface of quiet resentment. Outside, a sea of reporters awaited, cameras flashing and microphones moved forward, capturing every humiliating moment as he was paraded past them. Behind him, UA teachers and staff watched with cold, stoic faces, their backs turned on the boy they had once praised. The reporters swarmed, shouting questions and commentary. One of them sneered that UA students were true heroes for exposing this traitor, while another praised Bakugo and the others for making everyone feel a little safer that night. Izuku's fists clenched, his nails digging into his palms. His heart pounded with furious rhythm, his body trembling with barely contained rage. They were thanking his classmates, praising them for turning on him, for labeling him a villain without ever listening to his side. His mother, Inko, was being held back by security as she tried to reach him, her desperate voice drowned out by the crowd. Some reporters turned on her, muttering harsh comments that felt like knives slicing through her. One jeered that being a villain must run in the family, while another smirked, suggesting she must be ashamed of him. Izuku could feel his blood boiling, his vision narrowing as the anger roared in his ears. Suddenly, in a surge of adrenaline, he twisted against the officers holding him, pulling free. Before anyone could react, he charged toward Bakugo, the one who had condemned him without hesitation. Izuku's head connected with Bakugo's face in a swift motion, the impact echoing through the chaotic crowd. Bakugo stumbled back, cursing, just as Izuku's knee came up, channeling his fury into a strike that left Bakugo reeling. He expressed his anger at Bakugo for betraying him, his voice filled with venom. The officers were on him in seconds, restraining him with more force, pulling him back. But he wasn't finished. His gaze locked onto Uraraka, who had watched it all unfold with wide eyes, her face pale. He accused her of abandoning him, calling her a worthless fraud and a fake hero no better than the rest of them. Uraraka's face crumpled with shock, hurt flashing in her eyes. But Izuku no longer cared. The bitterness and anger had consumed him, transforming his once kind heart into a hardened core of resentment. As he was led back toward the police van, the crowd around him jeered and condemned him, whispering terrible things about him and his mother. The hatred and betrayal coiled tighter. Within him, feeding the dark flame ignited inside. He glanced back one last time, meeting his mother's tearful gaze, and a bitter resolve settled in his heart. They had destroyed him, everything he had believed in, everything he had fought for. And now they would all pay. Inko's heart shattered as she watched her son being taken away, his face twisted in anger and betrayal. Breaking free from the security holding her back, she ran after him, her voice trembling as she called out desperately. She pleaded for Izuku, insisting he was not a villain but her precious boy who deserved a chance to explain. The crowd watched, some with pity, others with judgment in their eyes. Whispers floated through the air, their hurtful words piercing her like daggers. Inko's knees nearly buckled under the weight of their comments, but she forced herself to stay upright, her love for her son giving her strength. She reached the police van just as the door was about to close and caught one last glimpse of Izuku's face through the bars. His eyes softened for a moment, revealing a flicker of sorrow and regret. Inko pressed her hand against the cold metal of the van's door, vowing to fight for him. She would not let them take him away like this. Izuku's eyes locked onto hers, the anger melting away for a brief second, replaced by something vulnerable that reminded her of the little boy who used to cling to her leg, wide-eyed and hopeful. But then, the door slammed shut, cutting off her view, and the van roared to life, pulling away. Inko collapsed to her knees, tears streaming down her face as she watched her son disappear down the road, taken from her by a world that had turned against him. Her sobs filled the air, raw and heart-wrenching, a mother's love laid bare for everyone to see. She whispered her apologies, clutching her chest as if trying to hold together the pieces of her broken heart. She promised herself that she would find a way to get him back, no matter what. As the crowd dispersed, casting harsh glances her way, Inko realized that her battle was only beginning. The world had branded her son a villain, and now she would have to stand alone against everyone to prove his innocence even if no one believed in him but her. Inko Midoriya's heart throbbed with grief and fury as she marched toward the UA faculty members gathered outside the courtroom. Her normally gentle face was contorted with rage, her eyes burning with an intensity that caught everyone's attention. Nizu, Aizawa, and All Might stood before her, trying to appear resolute, but they could not mask the unease they felt under her seething glare. She stopped in front of All Might first, her hands trembling with emotion. Without warning, her hand shot up, and she struck him across the face, the sound echoing around them. The shock was evident in All Might's eyes, but he did not retaliate. He stood there, speechless, as Inko's voice rose, full of hurt and anger. She demanded to know how he could allow her son to be taken away like a criminal after all he had promised to protect him. All Might's face fell, guilt overtaking him as he struggled to find words, but Inko did not give him a chance. She turned to Aizawa, her fury unwavering, questioning how he could disregard everything Izuku had done for his classmates, for him, for the school. Her voice dripped with contempt as she accused them of calling him a hero until it was easier to cast him aside. Aizawa looked down, unable to meet her piercing gaze, shame evident in his silence. Just then, Mitsuki Bakugo approached, worry etched on her face. She reached out as if to comfort Inko, but Inko recoiled, her expression darkening further. She warned Mitsuki not to consider her a friend anymore, blaming her son for Izuku's predicament. Her hands clenched, and her quirk began to flicker, a manifestation of her overwhelming emotions. Before anyone could react, she extended her hand toward Katsuki, who stood nearby, watching the scene with a mix of annoyance and confusion. In a sudden surge of her quirk, she targeted the nerves in Katsuki's arm, tugging sharply. Katsuki gasped, his face contorting in discomfort as his arm jerked involuntarily. He gritted his teeth, clutching his wrist as he felt the effects of her influence. Mitsuki cried out, horrified as her son stumbled backward, wincing. The police moved quickly, restraining Inko before her quirk could escalate further, but her fury remained. Despite the officers holding her back, she managed to cast one last, withering glare at Mitsuki, expressing that the pain her son felt was just a fraction of what she felt now. Mitsuki, shaken and heartbroken, pleaded with the police to drop the charges, explaining that Inko was a mother in pain and that she could not blame her for lashing out. The officers exchanged glances, reluctantly easing their grip on Inko but informing her that she would be put under house arrest due to the incident. Inko did not resist, she simply slumped, her rage fading into a sorrow so deep it threatened to consume her. Back at home, Inko sat alone, confined but lost in her anguish. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she clutched a photograph of her son, the boy who had once been her joy and pride. She whispered to the empty room, her voice barely a breath, expressing her sorrow and determination to fight for him. Inko felt a profound sense of sorrow as she sat alone in her dimly lit living room, tears streaming down her face. The grief weighed heavily in her chest, making it difficult to breathe. With trembling fingers, she picked up her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found her husband's name. Once a source of strength, he was now a distant voice she desperately hoped would answer her call. The dial tone rang, but there was no answer. As the line switched to the message recorder, Inko's heart sank, yet she refused to give up. Taking a shaky breath, she spoke into the silence, her voice breaking. She expressed her need for him, for his support, especially for their son, Izuku. She paused, overwhelmed by fresh waves of sobs, as she shared the heartbreaking news. Izuku had been taken from them, branded as a villain and a traitor by those they once trusted. Inko's voice trembled as she conveyed her helplessness, pleading for her husband to return and help save their son. Her words faded into quiet sobs as she pressed the phone to her forehead, wishing he could somehow feel her pain. She felt lost without him and without Izuku, clutching the phone to her chest as if it could bridge the distance between. After leaving the message, she sat in silence, drowning in her sorrow, her heart feeling hollow. She took another sip of sake, the bitterness amplifying her emptiness. Inko stared blankly at the wall, wondering if her plea would reach her husband or if she would have to face this nightmare alone. Memories of happier times with her husband flashed through her mind, but the uncertainty of his response loomed heavily over her. Later, Inko found herself at the kitchen table, trembling as she took another sip from the half-empty bottle in front of her. The bitter taste did little to numb the ache in her heart, a pain that felt unbearable. She reflected on how quickly everything had unraveled. Her husband called away for work, and now her precious Izuku taken from her by those she had trusted. Her phone buzzed, and she glanced down to see a flood of notifications, hateful messages directed at her and Izuku from strangers who knew nothing of his true character. Each cruel word cut deeper, tearing open her wounds as tears streamed down her face. Desperate for connection, she dialed a familiar number, hoping to hear a voice that cared. But the call went to voicemail. With a shuddering breath, she left a message, pleading for help and expressing her fear of losing Izuku. After hanging up, her heart shattered further as she gripped the bottle tightly, tears continuing to flow, reflecting the bitterness and grief within her. Izuku stumbled forward, shackled at the wrists and ankles, the weight of his chains pressing against his bruised skin. Guards flanked him, their faces grim and devoid of compassion. He kept his gaze fixed ahead, refusing to meet their eyes as they led him through the imposing gates of Tartarus. The prison loomed over him, its high walls shrouded in cold steel. He felt the sting of a needle as a technician took his blood, cataloging his DNA. The retinal scanner blinked harshly in front of him, stripping away the remnants of his old life. The guards wasted no time, pushing him forward until he staggered into his cell. The metal door clanged shut behind him, echoing through the cold walls. Inside the dim cell, Izuku took in his surroundings, a stark concrete box with minimal light filtering through a small barred window. The faint hum of machinery and distant voices faded into an oppressive silence that weighed heavily on him. Clenching his fists, the reality of his situation settled in. They had discarded him, but beneath his calm exterior, anger simmered. Lowering himself to the cold floor, he began to formulate plans in his mind. They thought they could silence him by locking him away, but he was determined to prove them wrong. This was just the beginning. As he glanced around the dim cell, he noticed two figures already present, infamous villains he had heard whispers about. They eyed him with contempt and amusement, their twisted grins reflecting their satisfaction at seeing a former hero in turn brought low. Little Deku, the aspiring hero, was the target of mockery from one of the villains, a towering figure marked by scars from past battles. His companion, a wiry man with a cruel smile, laughed as he assessed Izuku like prey. They taunted him, belittling his dreams of heroism and mocking his current predicament, reducing him to just another trapped soul. Izuku felt the weight of their words, his fists clenching tightly. Before he could react, the larger villain lunged, delivering a punch that knocked the wind out of him, sending him stumbling backward. He bit down hard, refusing to show any sign of pain, knowing that revealing weakness would only encourage them further. The wiry villain moved in next, grabbing a handful of Izuku's hair and forcing him to meet his gaze. He slammed Izuku's head against the wall, each impact resonating painfully. The villain continued to taunt him, questioning the whereabouts of his classmates and friends, suggesting they were laughing at his misfortune. Despite the blurred vision and the pain coursing through him, Izuku steadied himself, determined not to let the tormentors see him falter. Each blow felt like an assault not just on his body but on his pride. This was his new reality, a hell where his past identity was weaponized against him, and the villains thrived on his suffering. The assault continued, with the two villains taking turns, relishing each blow and each twisted word aimed to break him down. As he slumped to the floor, bruised and battered, Izuku's resolve only grew stronger, like iron forged in fire. Each strike and mocking word fueled a growing hatred within him. This was not merely a beating, it was the spark of a new purpose, one that burned deeper and darker than anything he had known before. The torment, he realized, was just beginning. In the following weeks, Tartarus became a relentless cycle of hardship for Izuku. No corner of the prison offered safety, no respite existed from the constant onslaught. In the cafeteria, villains would swipe his food, laughing cruelly as they dumped trays over his head, staining his face with cold, uneaten meals. Hunger gnawed at him, but each attempt to eat led to more ridicule and pain. The washroom was a new level of humiliation. The moment he entered, waiting predators would corner him, forcing him onto the grimy floor. They would sneer, shoving his face toward the toilets, forcing him to scrape his knuckles against the filthy tiles. His pride was trampled, yet he endured, his silent resolve like an unbreakable wall within. The courtyard offered no reprieve. Here, in broad daylight, where guards turned a blind eye, his tormentors treated him like a human punching bag. Izuku felt the bruises multiply, his muscles aching with every fresh kick and every strike that hit bone. Villains would circle him, taking turns, laughing as he struggled to stand upright each time he fell. He lost track of the bruises, the cuts, and the pain. After one particularly brutal day, his limp body was dragged to the prison infirmary, barely conscious and covered in fresh injuries. Lying on the cot, every inch of him ached, and every breath felt like swallowing glass. But beneath the agony, a seething hatred simmered. His body was battered, but his spirit remained unbroken. Each bruise and injury felt like fuel to a silent vow echoing in his mind: revenge. In Tartarus, pain became Izuku's constant companion, yet so did survival. Each day, the villains would break his bones and batter him until he lay barely conscious. Each night, the prison doctor would arrive with cold precision, mending his shattered form with relentless efficiency. Izuku's body was forced to recover, his bones fusing stronger, his endurance growing beneath layers of bruises and scars. The guards were no less brutal. They had their own twisted games, denying him rest and startling him awake every time he managed to slip into brief, exhausted sleep. Shackles dug into his wrists and ankles, ensuring he was never comfortable. Each new healing cycle only hardened his muscles, calloused his skin, and strengthened the very bones they sought to break. Over weeks, Izuku's body became a weapon forged in agony. His pain tolerance was pushed far beyond the human threshold, his bones resilient, and his will sharpened like a blade. Every bruise was a badge, every scar a reminder that he was still standing. The torture was meant to break him, but instead, it was creating something altogether unbreakable. With each passing day, he grew more immune to their cruelty, and an unquenchable rage simmered within him, waiting for the day he would finally be free to repay them for the hell they had inflicted upon him. In his dimly lit cell, all for one sat, his usual calm replaced with simmering fury as he replayed the voice message from his wife. Her desperate pleas trembled through the audio, filled with a pain he had never wanted her to know. She had begged him to bring their son back, her voice barely holding together as she poured out her anguish. Every word fueled a smoldering fire within him. He had promised her once, on the day they parted, that he would never bring his darkness into their lives again, that he would stay in the shadows for her sake and for the sake of their son. But this was different. The very world she had entrusted with their son's safety had betrayed them, branding Izuku a traitor and throwing him into Tartarus. His own flesh and blood, now buried in the darkest depths of society's prison. Izuku sat chained to a chair, his head bowed, his body bruised and beaten from the relentless torment he endured daily in Tartarus. His wrists and ankles throbbed where the shackles dug into his skin. He tried to numb himself, to block out the world, to ignore the taunts and sneers of the guards around him, who took sick pleasure in breaking the spirit of the once aspiring hero. One guard entered the room, sneering as he held up a small screen. He taunted Izuku, announcing that he had a little farewell message from his mother. Izuku's head snapped up, his green eyes wide with fear and confusion. The guard shoved the screen in front of his face and pressed play. The video started, revealing his mother tired and broken, tears emerging her cheeks as she stared into the camera. Her voice, filled with grief and anger, spoke of the betrayal and agony inflicted upon their family. Izuku's heart shattered as he watched her pain and sorrow spill out. Each word felt like a knife, slicing through him as she confessed her despair, her disdain for society, and the twisted reality that had brought their family to ruin. He could barely breathe as she continued, her voice tinged with a dark resolve he had never seen in her before. She expressed that he deserved better, and in a moment of vulnerability, she urged him to take action against the society that toyed with lives and discarded people when they were no longer useful. She implored him to avenge what had been done to them. Izuku felt his heart crack as he listened, tears filling his eyes. He shook his head, desperately wanting to reach through the screen and pull her back from this brink. The guard smirked, his tone mocking, revealing that her message had been broadcasted all over Japan. It seemed his mother wanted to give the world something to talk about. Izuku trembled, disbelief mingling with dread. The guard's words delivered a crushing blow as he revealed that Izuku's mother had taken her own life right after recording the message, unable to bear the shame of being associated with the traitor she had raised. Izuku's world crumbled. His heart felt as if it had been ripped from his chest, her last words echoing in his mind. His body felt numb, but within him, something was shifting, a darkness taking root where hope once resided. The guard continued, his words dripping with malice, claiming that everyone was now calling her the traitor's mother. Izuku's fists clenched, his knuckles turning white as rage began to swell within him. His sorrow twisted into a relentless fury. All his dreams and ideals had been shattered, and now he had nothing left to lose. For the first time, he felt the embers of vengeance stir in his heart. Meanwhile, All Might watched the video in stunned silence, his face pale as he processed what he had just seen and heard. Inko Midoriya's confession and her connection to his former foe was a devastating revelation, but it was her final words that shook him to his core. He whispered in disbelief that Nana had a daughter. All this time, he had thought he knew his mentor's legacy, believing he had carried on her will without a trace of family to speak of. Now, he realized there was a hidden story, a child his mentor had left behind, a son she had never known about. Not only that, but Inko's husband had been all for one. The realization struck him like a hammer, the weight of it almost too much to bear. The enemy he had fought for years, the embodiment of his greatest battles, had entwined himself with his mentor's family, leaving a child who had once idolized heroes, now condemned and twisted by the system All Might had once believed in. Horror crept over him as he watched Izuku's reaction on screen, the pain, the betrayal, and the flicker of something dark taking root in the young boy's eyes. This was no longer the bright-eyed, hopeful student he had met at UA. This was a boy with nothing left, broken and hollowed by his own world. All Might's voice trembled as he questioned what they had done. He had believed in Izuku, chosen him as a successor, and now that very trust felt like a mistake he couldn't undo. He saw the sorrowful, defeated image of the boy he had promised to protect, a boy who had always believed in him only to be discarded. The screen went blank, and the silence that followed felt deafening. All Might's hands shook slightly as he clenched them, filled with indescribable grief and guilt. He could almost feel Nana's spirit beside him, a questioning, heart-wrenching presence. He had failed her legacy, and worst of all, failed the boy who had tried so desperately to follow in his footsteps. He murmured that they had created this, wondering if there was any path left to right these wrongs, if Izuku would even want redemption. Or had the cruelty he endured already sealed his heart in darkness? In the depths of Tartarus, All for One sat in his cell, an aura of power muted by the quirk-suppressing restraints that held him. He was accustomed to silence and waiting, but the voice that had filled his cell moments before was one he could never have prepared for. The video of Inko's confession played in his mind over and over, each word a knife twisting in his heart. He could see her as she was then his beloved wife, her tears staining her cheeks as she recounted the life they had shared and the fate dealt to their son. Her anguish, her hatred for the heroes and the society that had shattered their family, and her final plea left him numb, yet beneath that numbness, a storm of rage began to rise. His fingers clenched into fists as he replayed her words, her broken voice confessing their secrets to the world. He had always known her strength, loyalty, and fierce love for Izuku. Yet to see her pushed so far, forced to carry the burden of shame and heartbreak alone, was too much. His restraint wavered as fury simmered, the containment cuffs crackling with the effort to keep his power in check. He whispered their names, filled with grief he had long thought himself beyond. For all his ambitions and power, he had failed to protect them, the two people who mattered most in his life. His enemies, the so-called heroes, had ripped his family apart, branded his son a traitor, and driven his wife to despair. And he could do nothing. Here, in this cold, silent cell, he was powerless, forced to watch from afar as the world took everything from him. Anger boiled within him, a dark, seething rage threatening to burst through every barrier around him. The heroes had dared to condemn his son, to torture him in Tartarus, to turn his gentle-hearted, bright-eyed boy into a vessel of hate and vengeance. They would pay for it. Every one of them, from the leaders who wielded their power carelessly to the students who turned against Izuku. He muttered a promise of retribution, sensing a shift in the air as the guards outside his cell cast wary glances at one another, feeling the faint hum of his containment devices flicker. All for one's hands flexed as he calculated his next move, his years of planning and patience merging with a new, fierce motivation. He would escape one way or another, and when he did, he would not rest until his version of justice had been served. The memory of Inko's last words lingered in his mind, her final request echoing, to destroy everything for her, to dismantle the society that had broken her spirit and taken their son. The heroes, Yue, and everything they cherished would crumble beneath him. For his wife and son, he would make them pay. That night, in the dimly lit cell, Izuku sat motionless, his bruised and battered form a testament to the relentless torment he had endured. But tonight, something within him had finally snapped. The rage and despair simmered until they transformed into a cold, focused resolve. Every injury, every scar, every fractured bone had forged him into something stronger, hardening him both physically and mentally. Slowly, he rose to his feet, the shackles straining against his renewed force. With a single, powerful flex, the chains shattered, metal fragments clinking to the floor. His once kind, determined eyes were now vacant and hollow, devoid of hope or compassion. He looked around at his cellmates, who had taken pleasure in his suffering, and they saw something in him that froze them in place, in unyielding fury that chilled them to the bone. Without hesitation, Izuku moved through them like a storm, every punch and strike landing with unrestrained power. They screamed as he delivered injuries they would never forget, tearing through them with ruthless precision. He held nothing back, his movements relentless and efficient. As he stood amidst the fallen, his expression remained disturbingly blank, his gaze fixed on some distant point. His mind held only one thought, a vow of vengeance. The boy who had once dreamed of saving others was gone. Now, only a hollow shell remained, a being forged from hatred and betrayal, seeking to unleash a reckoning on those who had stripped him of everything. Izuku lay down on the cold, hard floor of his cell, trying to find a semblance of peace amidst the rage that still simmered within him. But his attempt to rest was cut short when a group of guards stormed into his cell, sneering and taunting him. This time, however, they found no fear in his eyes, only an unyielding, empty darkness. Without warning, Izuku sprang to his feet, his movements swift and lethal. The guard's smirks faded, replaced with panic as he grabbed one by the arm, twisting until a sharp crack echoed through the cell. One by one, they tried to subdue him, but he met each attempt with terrifying ferocity. Limbs were wrenched and bones shattered beneath his hands as he moved like a vengeful spirit, his expression cold and merciless. Shouts and screams filled the corridor as the guards outside witnessed the unfolding chaos, only to be drawn in themselves. They rushed to restrain him, But Izuku was unstoppable. He fought with the strength and fury of a demon, each blow leaving lasting, unforgiving damage. The once quiet prison hallways now echoed with chaos, the guards lying broken and defeated in his wake. As the dust settled, Izuku stood alone, his cell littered with the remnants of those who had dared to break him. His breathing slowed and he returned to the cold floor, his hollow gaze drifting upwards. They had tried to reduce him to nothing, but he would be the one to destroy everything they held dear. The next morning, the atmosphere in Tartarus grew colder as All Might entered the cell block where All for One was contained. The two men locked eyes, and despite his restraints, All for One's presence was chilling, an aura of pure malice contained only by the quirk-suppressing cuffs that bound him. For the first time in his life, All Might felt a twinge of hesitation as he looked into the face of his old enemy, a man stripped of his power but consumed with rage. As All Might approached, All for One's gaze narrowed, his voice dripping with venom as he spoke, expressing that if it weren't for the cuffs, All Might and every so-called hero would be dead by now. His words were low, a quiet promise laced with hatred that made the air feel heavier. He demanded to know if All Might realized what he had done, claiming that because of their selfish actions, his wife was dead. His tone rose, every word aimed at All Might's conscience. All Might stood his ground but struggled to maintain his composure. He began to explain that he hadn't known, but All for One cut him off with a bitter, humorless laugh. He accused the heroes of thinking they were noble and righteous, but in their arrogance, they had destroyed the lives of the very people they claimed to protect. He lamented how they had paraded his son as a traitor and driven his wife to despair, his voice shaking with raw, unfiltered grief and anger. All Might felt guilt mix with anger as he struggled to find the words. He began to explain Inko's revelations about her past and the pain she endured, trailing off as he felt the weight of his role in the events that had unfolded. All for One bitterly acknowledged the truth, realizing that while he suffered, the heroes had celebrated. All Might's jaw clenched, feeling the weight of All for One's words. He attempted to defend himself, but All for One spat, his eyes blazing with hatred. He warned that if his son became the monster they all feared, it would be on the heroes. He declared that the society they upheld was built on the broken lives of people they didn't care about. Leaning forward, his restrained hands trembling with barely contained rage, he vowed that when he broke out of there, he would not rest until he had destroyed every piece of it, in her name. All Might felt a shiver run down his spine, knowing that, despite All for One's defeated state, his resolve had only grown more dangerous. All for One's eyes glinted with cold, calculating fury as he leaned closer, declaring that the heroes had planted the seed of vengeance in his son. Izuku might have had a chance, but now he had been pushed too far. What held him back was his mother's kindness, her gentle heart. But after witnessing what had been done to her, he resolved to no longer remain silent. All Might listened, feeling the weight of those words pressing down on him like stones. He struggled to find a response, but before he could speak, All for One continued, his voice filled with dark certainty. "You and your society have pushed him over the edge," he hissed. "Remember this, Tashinori, he is my son. The blood of destruction flows through him. He could become everything you feared. I would be a symbol of pure evil and devastation, a force that will tear down every one of your so-called pillars of peace. He will take my place. And do you know his quirk, Tashinori?" All Might remained silent, his expression grim. "He is an elementalist, able to command every element to his will. I blocked it when he was young, weakened it to keep him safe because his body couldn't handle its power. But tomorrow..." All for One's gaze intensified. "Tomorrow is his birthday, the day he reaches the age where his full potential will awaken. And when he does, I'll be waiting, ready to pass on my power to him." All Might's fists clenched, the reality of All for One's words settling heavily in his mind. "Tell your master, All Might," All for One sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "Tell her she has failed yet another grandchild. First Tenko, now Izuku. Her daughter, her son, and now her grandson all turned away from her so-called heroism, lost to her noble ideals. They both despised her, Inko and Izuku alike. They hated what she stood for, the way she abandoned family for society's expectations. They are lost because of her and you. He paused, the hatred in his eyes simmering. Izuku will destroy you, and he will shatter everything you hold dear. This is a promise, all might, a promise from a father and a husband who will see vengeance delivered, no matter the cost. All Might felt a coldness settle within him, realizing that the man before him wasn't just a villain, he was a father, vowing to leave behind a legacy of hatred that would consume the very heart of the hero world. Inside the realm of One for All, the vestiges of the past wielders stood in stunned silence, watching the chilling scene unfold. They could hardly believe what they were witnessing, the heartbreaking video of Inko Shimura, a woman they had known only in fragments, now pouring her heart out in raw agony. The air was heavy as her voice filled the space, her words striking each of them with relentless force. Nana Shimura watched in horror as her daughter's image played on the screen, her once vibrant and hopeful child now a shadow, a woman broken by years of loneliness, betrayal, and grief. Nana's hands trembled as Inko recounted her abandonment, the scars left by her mother's choice to leave her and Kotaro behind. Each word was a painful reminder of the sacrifices Nana had made, choices she had believed were right for the greater good, but now realized had left a deep, irrevocable wound. As Inko revealed the truth about Hisashi, Nana's heart sank further. She had never known that her own grandson, Izuku, bore the legacy of All for One. The weight of her decisions, the generations of suffering they had caused, crashed down on her with unbearable clarity. All Might, too, watched in silent devastation. He had always carried the weight of his mentor's legacy with pride, but now he felt only guilt, seeing the consequences that had rippled through Nana's family. As Inko's final words echoed, "Destroy them, Izuku. Destroy this society that thinks it can toy with lives and discard people when they're no longer useful," the spirits of One for All were left reeling. This was a woman who had lost everything to a world that glorified heroes, only to abandon those it had deemed unworthy of salvation. Inko's plea hung heavy in the air, a haunting curse that resonated deep within each of them. Nana collapsed to her knees, her face buried in her hands as she wept, the full weight of her actions finally breaking her. She whispered, "Inko, my dear, sweet Inko. I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this." Her regret echoed, reaching the ears of each One for All user, a reminder that heroism often came at a price one they had always thought worth paying until now. Yagi, his face filled with grief, rested a hand on Nana's shoulder. "I never knew. I never imagined this would be the cost of our mission," he murmured, his voice choked with sorrow. The others were silent, each lost in thought, burdened by the realization of what their legacy had done to the family they had sworn to protect. Inko's final image faded, her message lingering in there. "Mine's a testament to the brokenness that lay beneath society's expectations, a challenge to the ideals they had fought so long to uphold. They could no longer ignore the pain their choices had caused, nor the cost that had been paid by those left behind. The spirit of One for All was left with a scar, a reminder that heroism, for all its glory, had a darker side, one that could destroy lives just as easily as it saved them." Nana's spirit shattered further upon hearing Inko's last, tragic decision. The weight of her daughter's final act hit her like a tidal wave, sinking her into a pit of grief and despair. Her body shook, her cries echoing through the empty, timeless space of One for All, and every past user watched, unable to offer solace for the pain she bore. Each revelation had already torn through Nana, the abandonment of her children, the path Kotaro had taken, the suffering her grandson had endured. But Inko's final act of desperation was a pain beyond anything she could bear. Her mind replayed the image of her daughter in that dark, lonely room, the hopelessness in her eyes as she recorded her last words. It was a heartbreak she would never recover from, a wound carved so deep that it reverberated through the very core of One for All. But why did it have to be like this? Nana choked out, her voice quivering, her hands gripping her chest as if trying to stop her heart from breaking completely. All Might placed a hand on her shoulder, but no words could comfort her, no heroism could erase the reality that her choices had left a legacy of pain, grief, and brokenness for her family. As Nana sat in her despair, the other users shared her guilt, feeling the weight of the tragic history they had all contributed to. In the silent space of One for All, they stood together, mourning not just Inko, but all the lives and dreams lost to the ideals they had fought so tirelessly to uphold. All Might emerged from his mindscape, leaving without a word, but the warning from All for One echoed ominously behind him. All for One laughed maniacally as he proclaimed that All Might's son would seek revenge, vowing to destroy society and all heroes until he fulfilled Inko's last wish. All Might was left to ponder whether they had truly done the right thing or if they had created a monster destined to wreak havoc until satisfied. The next day, an unsettling silence blanketed the cafeteria as Izuku entered. His figure cast an imposing shadow, his expression hardened, and his eyes devoid of any trace of innocence or fear. The other inmates, sensing something different, whispered among themselves, while a few dared to taunt him, sneering as they attempted to provoke him once more. Izuku remained unfazed. Instead, he stepped forward, his eyes darkening as he focused on those who approached him with hostility. In an instant, he struck, his movements precise and powerful. Each punch and kick landed with tremendous force, and soon, chaos erupted in the cafeteria as inmates scrambled to defend themselves or flee. Behind him, a haunting silhouette seemed to loom, amplifying the menace Izuku radiated. The sight chilled everyone to the core, and the bravest inmates who had once taken pride in tormenting him now trembled. One by one, Izuku overwhelmed them, his expression unchanging. The force of his strikes left them incapacitated, their cries echoing throughout the prison walls. Some attempted to crawl away, but Izuku showed no mercy, ensuring each one felt the weight of every blow he had endured at their hands. The guards watched, paralyzed, as Izuku dismantled the cafeteria single-handedly. To them, he resembled a true force of nature, his rage manifesting into something unstoppable and terrifying. This was no longer the boy they had ridiculed. He was now a relentless force, hardened by the unforgiving treatment he had suffered. As the last of his aggressors lay defeated before him, Izuku straightened, casting an emotionless gaze over the silent, fearful room. His mind was clear, and one thought remained: vengeance. Izuku approached the counter, his presence making the cafeteria worker hesitate. The server, who had once delighted in withholding food or mocking him, now stared back, hands trembling. Izuku demanded food, his voice low and cold, insisting on better than the scraps given to others. The server, glancing nervously at the guards who now averted their eyes, quickly scooped a proper portion onto Izuku's tray. Without a word of thanks, Izuku took his tray and found an empty table. The inmates around him fell silent, casting wary glances as he sat. No one dared approach or whisper. The terror in the air was palpable. For the first time, they realized that the boy they had mocked was now someone far beyond their reach, someone they feared. After finishing his meal, Izuku stood and let his gaze sweep over the silent cafeteria. His voice cut through the tense air, calm but laced with a promise of retribution. He stated that he wanted a better bed and improved conditions in his cell, ensuring every guard, inmate, and staff member heard him. He warned that if his demands were not met, there would be consequences. As he made his way toward the gym, those nearby instinctively parted to let him pass. Upon reaching the training area, he turned back to the guards lingering by the door, declaring that he was there to train and that anyone who dared to interrupt would face the wrath of the Oni they all feared. The guards shifted uncomfortably, sharing uneasy glances but remaining rooted in place, uncertain and wary. Izuku's reputation was spreading quickly. His presence now loomed over the prison, a vengeful force none dared to challenge. Izuku lifted the barbell, its weight feeling effortless in his grip. He sensed a few prisoners creeping up behind him, whispering and snickering, clearly underestimating his resolve. In one swift motion, he swung the barbell backward, connecting with a satisfying thud as the first inmate stumbled back, shocked. The others quickly tried to retreat, but Izuku's eyes narrowed, and he lunged forward, the barbell moving like an extension of his fury. One by one, each prisoner fell under his relentless strikes. The sounds of pain filled the gym, yet he continued, leaving no one standing. By the time he stopped, the once pristine barbell was stained, and he stood over the defeated bodies around him. The others in the gym could only watch, frozen, as he let the barbell drop with a chilling clang. Without a word, he turned his back on the scene and walked away, leaving behind the bruised and battered prisoners. His expression remained calm, but his eyes held a dark, unspoken promise for anyone else foolish enough to test him. Gran Torino noticed a notification of a viral video one quiet night in his modest, dimly lit home. Curiosity and concern tugged at him as he clicked on a video involving Inko Midoriya, the mother of Izuku, the boy Toshinori had spoken about with pride. The video began with a shaky image of Inko, her eyes red and hollow, her face pale, as if all hope had drained from her. She looked exhausted and broken, a stark contrast to the cheerful young mother he had once met. Her voice, raw and vulnerable, filled with bitterness, shook him. She introduced herself as Inko Midoriya, the so-called traitor's mother, and revealed secrets she could no longer carry. Clutching a bottle of wine for support, she disclosed her true identity as Inko Shimura, the daughter of Nana Shimura, the former symbol of peace. Gran Torino felt the weight of her words hit him like a freight train. He found himself frozen, memories of Nana flooding his mind. The proud, resilient woman he had fought alongside had a daughter he had never known, and that daughter was now unveiling a painful truth. Inko revealed that she was also the sister of Kotaro Shimura, inheriting her mother's quirk against her will. She spoke of her father, who had been killed in the line of duty, and how her mother, in her pursuit of justice, had abandoned her and her brother in an orphanage. Her brother had harbored hatred for their mother, and Inko admitted that part of her felt the same. The bitterness in Inko's words resonated deeply with Gran Torino. He had always known Nana's choices were difficult, but he had never realized the toll they took on her children. As he listened, the weight of Nana's legacy felt heavier than ever. Inko took a shaky breath and began to speak of her husband, Hisashi. She recalled her love for him, how she had believed he was a kind and humble man. But after their marriage, he revealed a shocking truth: he was all for one, the very man that all might despised. He had made that choice to protect their family from a world that would judge their son for being the child of both a hero and a villain. Gran Torino's heart twisted painfully as Inko poured out her soul. The revelation struck him hard. This boy he had once met was both all for one's son and Nana's grandson. Now, Toshinori and the Hero Society had imprisoned him. Inko's voice grew weaker, tears streaming down her face as she spoke of her son, who had been sentenced for crimes she believed he did not commit. Her body trembled as she took another sip from the bottle, struggling to contain her sobs. She expressed her hatred for the heroes, blaming them for the destruction of her family. Because of their judgment, her husband was gone, her son was suffering, and she felt she could no longer endure the pain. Her final words pierced Gran Torino's heart. She urged her son, if he could hear her, to destroy the society that had torn their lives apart. With a shuddering breath, she set the camera down, her sobs echoing before the screen faded to black. Gran Torino sat in stunned silence, staring at the screen. Anger ignited within him. Toshinori's name appeared in interviews alongside others from UA. His fists clenched, betrayal searing through him. He had trained Toshinori to uphold justice and honor Nana's legacy, yet Toshinori had allowed her grandson to be branded a traitor and suffer in a prison cell. Gran Torino stood abruptly, grabbing his coat with determination. He resolved to confront Toshinori, unwilling to let him escape the consequences of his actions. Minutes later, he arrived at Toshinori's door and pounded on it with force. When Toshinori opened the door, his confident demeanor faded upon seeing Gran Torino's stormy expression. Before Toshinori could speak, Gran Torino seized him by the collar, pulling him close. He spoke in a low, seething tone, expressing his anger at Toshinori's choices that had left a family in ruins, a family Nana had fought her entire life to protect. Gran Torino accused Toshinori of betraying everything she stood for. The dimly lit cell in Tartarus felt oppressive, a cage for the most dangerous beings. The silence was broken only by the sound of chains as Stain moved, his scarred face twisted into an amused smirk. Across from him, Izuku Midoriya stood still, his emerald eyes devoid of emotion, his posture unnervingly calm for someone in such a grim place. Stain's voice broke the silence, low and gravelly, filled with intrigue and menace. He acknowledged Izuku's courage but warned him that guts alone would not save him. Outside the cell, heroes, villains, and monsters all sought power and control, ready to tear apart anyone who showed weakness. To survive and destroy them, Izuku needed more than brute strength. He needed to become a predator who could use anything as a weapon. Izuku remained silent, his stillness reflecting cold, calculating patience. Stain's smirk widened, pleased with the boy's demeanor. He crouched down and scratched a rough circle onto the concrete floor with a broken shard of metal, introducing the Killer Peter SS rank method. Stain explained that this method was about absolute efficiency, teaching that a true killer relies on intent and the environment rather than tools. He tossed a piece of chalk at Izuku's feet, mocking its perceived uselessness. But in the hands of a killer, even something as simple as chalk could end a life. The first step in the SS rank method was understanding that intent transforms the mundane into the deadly. Without warning, Stain lunged at Izuku, chains clinking as he closed the distance. Izuku instinctively stepped back, raising the chalk defensively. Stain struck the chalk from his hand, emphasizing that a killer does not defend, they act. Izuku retrieved the chalk, his expression unchanged, ready to learn. He stood still for a moment, processing Stain's words. Then, with a sudden burst of movement, he lunged forward, aiming the chalk at Stain's throat. The hero killer sidestepped easily, his chains catching Izuku's arm and twisting it behind his back. Stain acknowledged the improvement, releasing him and noting that Izuku was still thinking like a hero. He warned that hesitation would be his downfall. Izuku rose to his feet, his emerald eyes glinting with newfound understanding. He nodded silently. The next night, Stain expanded the lesson. He scattered various objects across the cell: rusty nails, shards of broken concrete, and a single shoelace. He explained that a killer doesn't carry an arsenal. They are the arsenal. Everything around them can be a weapon if used correctly. Izuku picked up the shoelace, his gaze thoughtful. Stain chuckled darkly, explaining that a shoelace could be used to trip someone, bind their limbs, or even act as a sling for a heavier object. The true weapon was not the shoelace but the person wielding it. Izuku tightened his grip on the shoelace as Stain demonstrated how to use each item in the room. He showed Izuku how to sharpen a nail against the concrete to create a makeshift dagger, how to use the weight of a shard to break bones, and how to turn a corner of the cell into a trap. Stain emphasized that adaptation is key. A true killer sees opportunity in chaos. By the third week, Stain introduced the most critical part of the method: understanding the opponent. He explained that a predator observes, calculates, and then strikes. The way an opponent breathes, stands, and moves reveals their intentions. Izuku needed to read them before they saw him. To test this, Stain attacked without warning. Each strike was swift, but his movements carried subtle patterns. Izuku had to rely on observation rather than instinct. Over time, he began to notice the signs: the tightening of Stain's muscles before a lunge, the twitch of his fingers before a feint. By the end of the lesson, Izuku had not only dodged several attacks but had countered one, grazing Stain's arm with a shard of concrete. Stain grinned, blood dripping from the shallow wound, acknowledging Izuku's progress. The next day, in the dimly lit halls of Tartarus, Midoriya sat atop a crude throne of metal and chains, flanked by guards who seemed more nervous than protective. The echoes of footsteps reached him, and he turned his gaze toward the approaching figure. The guards stiffened as All for One emerged, his ominous presence filling the room. A strange silence enveloped them as he looked upon Midoriya, his eyes gleaming with hidden intent. All for One's voice was smooth, almost cordial, as he acknowledged Midoriya's rise to power. Midoriya narrowed his eyes, sensing that All for One was not there merely to acknowledge his strength or position. There was something deeper, a familiarity in his tone that hinted at more than mere curiosity. Midoriya demanded to know the reason for All for One's visit, refusing to indulge in his games. A faint smile crossed All for One's lips, one that never reached his eyes. He claimed he wanted to see the young man Midoriya had become, mentioning a connection that stirred something within Midoriya. Midoriya's expression remained unreadable, but there was an intensity behind his eyes. He felt shaken by the implications of All for One's words. All for One insisted that the truth had been withheld to give Midoriya the life of a hero away from him, but destiny had brought them together. Midoriya's mind raced as he tried to reconcile this claim with everything he knew. He rejected the notion that calling him son would sway him. All for One chuckled, an eerie sound that sent shivers down the spines of those nearby. He acknowledged that he did not expect Midoriya to be swayed but wanted him to know that his legacy flowed within him, even if he did not want to acknowledge it. Midoriya clenched his fists, every instinct rejecting the idea of sharing any legacy with All for One. He declared that All for One's legacy meant nothing to him and that he was a monster. All for One nodded as if he had anticipated the response, pointing out that Midoriya was rising to power, commanding fear and respect, and was more like him than he realized. Midoriya's glare was icy, and he firmly stated that he would never become what All for One was. All for One's expression shifted, a strange mix of pride and amusement, as he remarked that they would see if Midoriya's path remained his own or if he would be drawn to All for One's. With that, All for One turned, his dark silhouette blending into the shadows, leaving Midoriya to process his words alone. As he faded into the darkness, he paused and looked back, his voice dropping to a low, chilling whisper. He mentioned Midoriya's mother, Inko, and questioned whether he planned to ignore her final wish. Midoriya's heart skipped a beat, gripping the armrests of his throne as memories of his mother's face and her last words cut through him. All for One's tone softened, almost feigning sympathy, as he spoke of her last wish being simple yet powerful. He reminded Midoriya that she wanted him to tear the world down and make them all pay, letting the words hang in the air as he studied Midoriya's expression. Midoriya's eyes darkened, memories flooding his thoughts. He recalled the agony his mother endured, the world that turned its back on her, and the quiet anger she hid behind gentle smiles. Her last words were born not of malice but of grief, betrayal, and helplessness. That grief and desperation were now rooted deep in his heart. All for One continued to push, his voice a mix of mockery and venom, questioning whether they had sent her ashes and if the so-called heroes had shown any respect. Midoriya felt something snap within him. His jaw tightened as he forced himself to breathe slowly, suppressing the surge of anger rising in his chest. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady but simmering with rage, revealing that they had discarded her as if she meant nothing. All for One's smile twisted with satisfaction, indicating that Midoriya understood the world his mother despised and the people who wronged her. They deserved nothing less than what she had asked of him. Her wish was still waiting to be fulfilled. Midoriya's gaze hardened, an intense resolve settling within him. The weight of his mother's words, her last wish, became an oath etched into his heart: destroy everything. With one final glance, All for One stepped back into the shadows, leaving Izuku alone with his thoughts and a choice: to honor his mother's final wish, no matter the cost. Izuku's eyes narrowed, suspicion dripping from his demeanor as he questioned why All for One had called him there. All for One let out a quiet chuckle, though his gaze remained serious, revealing that he believed it was time for Izuku to inherit his quirk All for One. Midoriya stiffened at the thought of wielding the very quirk that made this man a living nightmare, a legend of power and control. It was a gift with more darkness than he had ever considered. All for One continued, his eyes gleaming as he held Midoriya's gaze, revealing that there was more. His true quirk, the one he should have had from the beginning, Elementalist. He had blocked it, knowing Izuku's young body was too fragile to handle its power back then. But now, he was more than ready. The realization hit Izuku like a shockwave. A quirk he had never known he possessed, locked away this entire time. The name Elementalist radiated strength, the kind of power he had always dreamed of unleashing without constraint. All for One observed as the realization dawned on him, acknowledging that Izuku was angry and wanted to change society, to tear down everything that had wronged him and his mother. He could do it with All for One, but to truly fulfill her last wish, he would need more than rage. He would need to wield both his elementalist abilities and All for One's power. Izuku's gaze was intense, his mind racing as he questioned why All for One wanted him to inherit the very thing that had given him power. All for One leaned forward, his voice a dark murmur, explaining that the world had lost sight of true strength and that he saw in Izuku the will to reshape it. The world had betrayed him, stripped him of everything. Wasn't it time he made them remember what real power was? Izuku's expression hardened, the weight of his mother's final wish echoing in his mind. To honor her and create change, perhaps he did need to wield more than his own strength. The path was brutal, but the promise of that power was almost impossible to resist. He asked what he had to do, his voice steady but charged with fierce resolve. All for one smiled, satisfied, seeing the spark of ambition and vengeance in his eyes. All for one continued, surprisingly calm, explaining that the blocking of his quirk wasn't solely his decision. His mother, Inko, had been terrified for him. She knew All for One's true identity and understood the weight of power, even if she hated him for it. She worried about what that quirk could do to him at such a young age. Izuku's eyes flickered with conflicting emotions as he struggled to imagine his mother knowing any of this, trusting All for One enough to let him block his quirk. She had been scared that power would consume him, that he would hurt himself in ways he couldn't understand. All for One's tone softened slightly as he revealed that Inko loved him more than anything, willing to let her son grow up without ever knowing his true power if it meant keeping him safe. Izuku clenched his fists, his anger somewhat tempered by the thought of his mother's worry. He could feel her fear and love through All for One's words, leaving him with an unsettling mix of resentment and sadness. She had been protecting him in ways he had never known. He murmured that All for One had no right to make those decisions. All for One conceded, acknowledging the pain he had caused. But now, Izuku had that power, and her fears were no longer his burden to bear. He was ready to use it in a way she wouldn't have imagined, for the change she would have wanted for him and perhaps for more. Izuku's anger didn't fade entirely, but it was now focused and sharpened by understanding. His mother had tried to protect him, even if it meant aligning with someone she detested. All for One's words struck Izuku like a hammer, heavy and unrelenting. He continued, sincerely explaining that Inko had sacrificed her career, her ambitions, everything she had worked so hard to build, just to raise him. She was brilliant, one of the best. If she had wanted, she could have been one of the country's most revered judges or a renowned lawyer. But she chose him every time. Izuku's mind flashed back to the framed degree in their modest apartment, recalling the way his mother sometimes looked at it with a small, wistful smile. She had never complained or hinted at regret, she had simply poured everything into raising him. All for One's voice softened as he continued, revealing that if there was a part of Izuku that truly wanted to honor her and avenge the pain and injustice she suffered, he should listen. Not as a villain or as the man the world called a monster, but as his mother's husband, the man who once held her trust. For her sake, he should give All for One a chance to guide him. Izuku's fists trembled, his heart a storm of emotions, rage, grief, and something harder to define. All for One had been everything he despised, everything his mother had once shielded him from. But now, as he stood there, looking into the eyes of the man who had loved her in his own twisted way, Izuku felt a pull, a deep, unyielding weight in his chest. His voice was low, almost a whisper as he asked what he should do for her. All for One met his gaze, unwavering, urging him to rise to the heights she had dreamed of for him. He spoke of taking the power to change the world, to root out the decay and bring forth a new order, emphasizing that society was broken and Izuku could be the one to rebuild it for her, for everything she had sacrificed. Izuku took a slow, deep breath, feeling the weight of his mother's legacy settle on his shoulders. This was no longer just about revenge, it was about carrying on the strength, love, and fierce protection she had shown him throughout his life. If that meant listening to All for One even just this once, then perhaps he owed her that much. His voice, cold and steely, cut through the silence as he expressed a desire to give the world the pain they had inflicted on her, 100 times worse than what they had done to him. All for One's eyes gleamed with dark satisfaction, sensing Izuku's unyielding resolve. He affirmed Izuku's intentions, noting that they had taken everything from her and from them. Now it was time for them to understand what true suffering felt like. Izuku's fists clenched, a storm of emotion threatening to break free as he recalled how they had wanted him to be powerless, how they thought they could silence her and cast her aside. He vowed to make them regret every second of that. All for One nodded approvingly, his voice soft but laced with venom as he assured Izuku that they would know the consequences of underestimating her son. He stepped closer, declaring that together they would dismantle a society that bred hypocrisy and cruelty. Izuku's jaw tightened as the image of his mother's gentle smile flashed in his mind. She had sacrificed so much for him, sheltered him from darkness, even as it seeped into her own life. Now, he would return that devotion in the only way he knew how, by giving them all a taste of the fear, helplessness, and agony she had endured. For her, he whispered that they would pay every single one of them. The flickering lights of Tartarus cast long, uneven shadows on the damp walls. Izuku Midoriya sat cross-legged on the cold floor of his cell, his mind sharpened by the brutal training Stain had subjected him to. Yet, the next lesson would take him beyond instinct and precision. It would demand something deeper, the complete acceptance of his own darkness. Stain, the embodiment of conviction, stood before Izuku, his presence an oppressive weight. His scarred face was twisted into a grim mask, but there was no malice in his gaze, only cold understanding. He began by stating that Izuku had learned to kill, mastering the tools, instincts, and execution. However, that was only half of the transformation. A true killer does not just act, they become. The darkness is not something to wield, it is something to embody. Izuku's emerald eyes, now devoid of their former light, met Stain's unflinchingly. He acknowledged his understanding, but Stain insisted he did not yet grasp the full meaning. The first step was comprehension. Stain led Izuku into a deeper part of the prison, where the echoes of anguish served as a constant reminder of the cost of weakness. He gestured to the cells lining the walls, filled with killers, betrayers, and monsters, and asked Izuku what separated them from him. Izuku glanced at the shadowy figures behind the bars, their eyes glinting with malice. Stain explained that fear was the difference. They feared their own darkness and acted out of that fear. But Izuku needed to embrace it, accept it fully, for only then would he be truly free. The lesson was not taught through words alone. Stain forced Izuku to confront the prisoners, each one a reflection of what he could become if he failed. There were men who had killed for greed, vengeance, and sport, their eyes burning with madness and desperation. Stain reassured Izuku that he was not like them, that his darkness was not a weakness but a strength. He urged him to embrace it, promising that no one would be able to stop him. The next step was internal. Stain presented Izuku with a cracked mirror, its jagged edges reflecting a distorted image of the boy. He ordered Izuku to look at himself and ask what he saw. Izuku stared into the glass, his expression unreadable, and replied that he saw emptiness. Stain encouraged him to fill that emptiness, explaining that darkness was not just about what he had lost but about what he would become. Every scar and shadow was part of him, and he needed to accept and own it. To force the confrontation, Stain whispered doubts and fears into Izuku's ear, making him relive moments that had broken him, Bakugo's bullying, his mother's tears, the crushing weight of powerlessness. At first, the memories threatened to overwhelm him, but slowly, Izuku began to reshape them. The pain became fuel, the fear a weapon. Each memory transformed from a source of weakness into a foundation for his transformation. To teach Izuku how to live within the darkness, Stain devised a series of exercises that blurred the line between reality and illusion. He explained that Izuku must learn to move unseen, to exist in the spaces between light and shadow. The darkness would hide him, but only if he embraced it fully. Izuku was tasked with navigating Tartarus unnoticed, slipping past guards who patrolled the halls with flashlights cutting through the gloom. Initially he struggled, but with each attempt, he grew more adept, learning to anticipate their patterns and blend into the darkness as if he were a part of it. By the end of the exercise, he could move through the prison like a ghost, his presence undetectable even to the most vigilant guard. The final lesson was the most challenging. Stain brought in a prisoner known for his cruelty and violence, presenting him as Izuku's test. He handed Izuku a knife and commanded him to kill the man. The prisoner sneered, confident as he sized up the young boy, but Izuku did not hesitate. He stepped forward, his movements calm and deliberate. The confrontation was brief. Izuku's training had made him efficient, and the prisoner stood no chance. When it was over, Izuku stood over the man's lifeless body, the knife in his hand, his expression cold and emotionless. Stain nodded in approval, acknowledging that Izuku had not hesitated. You didn't falter. You embraced the darkness, Midoriya. You were ready. The transformation complete. By the end of the training, Izuku was no longer the boy who had entered Tartarus. He had become something else entirely, a weapon forged in shadows, tempered by pain and sharpened by resolve. As he stood in the dim light of the prison, his green hair casting eerie reflections on the walls, Izuku's voice broke the silence. He understood now, the darkness wasn't his enemy. It was his ally. He would use it to create a world where the weak no longer suffered. Stain watched him with a mixture of pride and unease. He reminded Izuku that the darkness was a double-edged sword and that he must wield it wisely, or it would consume him. Izuku's eyes, devoid of warmth, met Stain's. He declared that it wouldn't consume him, he was the darkness. With that, the boy who once dreamed of being a hero stepped fully into the shadows, his transformation complete. The final trial. Months of relentless training had honed Izuku Midoriya into something entirely unrecognizable. His once hopeful emerald eyes were now cold, calculating, and emotionless. Every muscle in his body, every thought in his mind, had been sculpted for one purpose: to move with purpose and to live in the shadows. Stain observed him with a mix of pride and somber understanding. This was the last day, the culmination of all the lessons, the trials, and the pain. Stain would now test Izuku to see if he had truly become what he needed to survive in the world. Stain's final words. The training room, a hollowed-out section of Tartarus untouched by light, had become their arena. Stain stood on one side, armed with his blood-red blades, while Izuku stood on the other, empty-handed. Stain informed Izuku that this was his final trial. He had learned everything Stain could teach him: how to move unseen and think like a predator. Now, he must prove that he could surpass Stain. Today, he was not Stain's student, he was his enemy. Gun leaned against a beam in the expansive underground training hall, his piercing eyes never leaving Midoriya. The air was heavy with the sound of fists striking metal, solid, relentless, and unyielding. A battered old refrigerator, its surface marred with deep dents and scratches, stood as Midoriya's opponent for the day. His bloodied knuckles struck with unwavering rhythm, each impact reverberating through the hall. Gun remarked that pain was the best teacher. It either broke a person or made them unshakable. He needed to know what kind of man Midoriya was. Midoriya didn't respond. His focus was razor-sharp. His breathing was labored, and his muscles screamed for rest, but his mind refused to waver. With almost mechanical precision, he raised his fist again and drove it into the twisted metal. Gu, sitting casually on a stack of mats nearby, twirled a wooden sword in his hands as he watched. He commented that at this rate, the refrigerator might hold up better than Midoriya. Gun glanced at Gu with a faint chuckle, stating that if Midoriya fell apart, he wasn't worth the effort. But if he kept going, he would become a masterpiece. The first few weeks were nothing short of hell. Gun's training philosophy was brutal: shatter the limits of the body and mind to forge something unbreakable. He told Midoriya that strength wasn't given, it was earned, and the price was everything he thought he had. Morning sessions began with grueling endurance exercises. Midoriya was made to carry heavy chains wrapped around his torso, dragging massive tires across uneven terrain. Gun insisted on uphill sprints, each run punctuated by Midoriya collapsing from exhaustion, only for Gun to bark orders for him to get back up. Gun explained that the body was a tool, and tools were useless if they broke under pressure. Midoriya gritted his teeth, hauling himself to his feet despite the weight pulling him down. His cold, focused expression didn't falter. By the third week, Gun introduced wall climbs with nothing but bare hands, punishing Midoriya for every slip or hesitation. His palms were raw and bleeding, but he didn't stop. Gu often watched from the sidelines, occasionally tossing in snide remarks. He questioned whether Gun was sure Midoriya wouldn't break. Gun didn't respond, his attention fixed on Midoriya. He believed Midoriya was not the type to break, he would adapt or die trying. When Gun deemed Midoriya's physical foundation strong enough, the focus shifted to technique. Each day brought the introduction of a new martial art, and each night was spent drilling it into perfection. Gun explained that Kyokushin karate was all about brute force, and every strike must be a knockout. Midoriya imitated the move, his kick slamming into the dummy with impressive force. The dummy quivered but didn't topple. Gun acknowledged Midoriya's effort but noted that his balance was off. He instructed him to try again. For hours, Midoriya practiced under Gun's scrutinizing eye. The faintest mistake was met with immediate correction. When the sun rose the next day, they moved on to the next art: Shotokan karate, judo, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, Muay Thai, and more, all drilled into Midoriya with relentless precision. Gu remarked that most people spent years mastering just one of these arts, but Midoriya was different. It was as if he was downloading them into his brain. Gun's gaze remained locked on Midoriya, his expression unreadable. He quietly noted that Midoriya was not just learning, he was evolving. But martial arts alone weren't enough. Gun designed a regimen of extreme strength and endurance training to push Midoriya beyond human limits. One day, he ordered Midoriya to punch through a reinforced steel slab set up in the training hall. Midoriya's knuckles were already raw, but he didn't hesitate. He struck the steel with all his might, the impact sending a painful shock up his arm. Gun commanded him to try again. The first cracks appeared after the 10th punch. By the 20th, the steel began to bend. Gun smirked slightly, stating that pain was temporary, but power was forever. Each task was more punishing than the last. One day, Midoriya was made to lift boulders. The next, he was tasked with running laps around the hall while dragging a sled loaded with weights. And always, Gun's voice pushed him further. He reminded Midoriya that everything in life fights back. If one wanted to win, they had to hit harder, move faster, and endure longer. There were no shortcuts. Midoriya's body ached for rest, but his mind remained a fortress, cold and focused. On the final day of training, Gun and Gu stood at the center of the hall, their postures relaxed but their eyes sharp. Gun's tone was heavy with anticipation as he declared that it was time for Midoriya to demonstrate everything he had learned and endured. Midoriya stepped forward, his expression unreadable. Without warning, he launched himself at Gun with explosive speed. Gun blocked the first strike, but the force of it pushed him back a step. Midoriya's movements were a terrifying blend of every style he had learned: brutal, precise, and relentless. Gun noted that Midoriya was holding back and urged him to stop treating him like he was fragile. Midoriya's next attack was faster, his strikes flowing seamlessly from one technique to another. A feint with his left hand followed by a spinning kick caught Gun off guard, sending him stumbling. Before Gun could recover, Midoriya delivered a perfectly timed sweep that knocked him to the ground. Gun lay there for a moment, breathing heavily, before he laughed a deep, satisfied laugh that echoed through the hall. He acknowledged Midoriya's achievement, stating that he was no longer just his student but his greatest work, his masterpiece. Midoriya stood silently, his cold eyes locked on Gun. Gu smirked from the sidelines, teasing Gun about being out of a job. Gun's grin widened, insisting there was always more to learn. He stepped closer to Midoriya, clapping a hand on his shoulder and affirming that he was ready for whatever came next. Midoriya's lips curled into the faintest smirk, his icy demeanor unshaken. He felt prepared for anything. That day, he walked out of the training hall a different man, hardened, unyielding, and armed with skills that would make him a force of nature. Behind him, Gun and Gu watched with a mixture of pride and awe, wondering what they had unleashed. Later, Midoriya stood in front of the mirror, his reflection almost unrecognizable. The face staring back at him was sharp and intimidating. His jet-black hair had an untamed yet refined look, and his piercing eyes held a depth that was both commanding and eerie. His physique embodied discipline and strength, honed from the rigorous training Gun had put him through. As he flexed his fingers, the scars from his past life were barely visible on his skin. The voice that escaped his lips was no longer timid. It was deep, calm, and calculated. Gun stood beside him, arms crossed, a satisfied smirk on his lips. He reminded Midoriya that the old him needed to die, and what stood before him now was his masterpiece. Midoriya was no longer a symbol of weakness. He was the predator in a world of prey. Midoriya turned his gaze toward Gun, acknowledging that this transformation was not just about appearance. Gun confirmed that he had ensured Midoriya would embrace what came next. With a new face, a new voice, and the strength to match, no one would recognize him, not even those who thought they knew him best. More importantly, no one would dare stand against him. Midoriya nodded slowly, his expression cold and unreadable. He inquired about the doctor who had helped him. Gun chuckled, noting that the doctor did an excellent job and preferred to disappear after making his miracles. Midoriya smiled faintly, stating he had no need for gratitude. This was merely a means to an end. Gun clapped a hand on Midoriya's shoulder, the force of it almost knocking the air out of the room. He expressed his approval of Midoriya's mindset, declaring that he was no longer Izuku Midoriya, the boy who couldn't fight back. From that day forward, he was the king of predators, a man forged in destiny. As Midoriya stepped outside the training compound for the first time since his transformation, the air felt different, colder. The eyes of everyone around him lingered on his new form, their awe and fear evident. Gun leaned against the doorway, watching as Midoriya began to adapt to his surroundings. As Midoriya strode forward, a group of recruits training nearby froze, their gazes following his every move. One of them whispered about whether he was the one Gun had been working on, noting that he didn't even look human anymore. Gun overheard and grinned, stating that Midoriya was beyond that now. Midoriya's voice broke through the murmurs, silencing everyone instantly. He warned them that whispers wouldn't help them survive and urged them to focus on themselves or risk crumbling under mediocrity. The recruits quickly returned to their training, their faces pale. Gun laughed softly, muttering to himself about how Midoriya was going to be something else. Later that evening, Midoriya stood alone in the shadows of the compound. His reflection in a broken window stared back at him, the moonlight accentuating every sharp angle of his new visage. His deep, commanding voice echoed in the silence as he contemplated his transformation. He recognized that his new face, voice, and strength were all tools for what was to come. The weak would be reminded of their place, and he would be the one to do it. From the shadows, Gun's voice interrupted his thoughts, asking what Midoriya would do with his power. Midoriya didn't turn to face him, stating that he would become the nightmare they feared and the shadow they couldn't escape. Gun chuckled, pleased with this response, welcoming Midoriya to his new self. In a tight security room, All for One's trembling hand hovered over Midoriya, the atmosphere heavy with energy. Midoriya's sharp, determined gaze pierced through the dimly lit chamber. His eyes, once vibrant green, had transformed, reflecting the darkness he had embraced. The scara of his eyes had turned an inky black, while his pupils shone a stark, almost ethereal white, radiating an unsettling aura of power. The tendrils of All for One's power coiled like serpents, reaching into Midoriya's core. His body trembled as the quirks poured into him, an overwhelming torrent of strength, memories, and raw potential. Pain rippled through him, but amidst the chaos, his expression remained eerily calm, a sinister smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Midoriya's voice, deeper and colder than ever, echoed in the chamber as he acknowledged the culmination of All for One's power, legacy, and ambition now becoming his own. All for One chuckled weakly, visibly drained from the process. Feel it. The power to reshape the world, to dominate and create as you see fit. How does it feel, my heir? Izuku raised a hand, flexing his fingers as dark, crackling energy surrounded him. His black scara and glowing white pupils seemed to pierce through the very fabric of the room. It felt liberating, he thought, carrying an edge of restrained fury and dark excitement. For the first time, he was not bound by anyone's expectations, neither by heroes, nor by society, nor even by All for One. All for One smirked faintly, pleased with the transformation. That was the mindset of a ruler. Midoriya's grin widened, devoid of warmth, only the cold confidence of someone who had finally grasped the destiny he believed he was meant for. He turned away from the weakened figure of All for One, his steps echoing as he walked toward the exit. As he pushed the heavy doors open, the cool night air greeted him. He paused, gazing up at the sky with his unsettling new eyes, reflecting the moonlight, their eerie glow a testament to the transformation he had undergone. This power wasn't just for destruction, it was for creation, for reshaping this broken world into one where strength and ambition reigned supreme. Memories of his past flashed through his mind, the ridicule, the rejection, the countless nights spent yearning for recognition. Those memories no longer hurt, they fueled him, forming the foundation of his resolve. No more weakness, he thought, clenching his fists. No more hypocrisy. The heroes and their flawed ideals would all fall. He would show them what true power looked like. His mind raced with plans. He thought of the quirks now residing within him, each one a piece of the arsenal he would use to dismantle the old world. First, he would master them, pushing each one to its limits and making them his own. Then he would tear apart their symbols of hope, starting with Yue Hai. The age of false peace was over. He smirked, the black scara of his eyes making the glow of his white pupils all the more striking in the shadows. They would see him coming, but they would not be able to stop him. Not the heroes, not the villains, not anyone. For a moment, the streets were silent, save for the sound of his steady footsteps. The city slept, unaware of the storm that had just been unleashed. Izuku Midoriya, reborn as a harbinger of change, disappeared into the darkness, his plans etched clearly in his mind. The world would kneel, he murmured to himself, his voice dripping with quiet menace. Not because they feared him, but because they would have no choice. As the surge of power settled within him, Izuku stood alone in the vast training room all for one had prepared for him. The air was thick with the residue of energy from the quirk transfer, and his body pulsed with raw, unrefined power. He exhaled slowly, his breath visible in the cool air, as his glowing white pupils scanned the room, his black scara making them appear even more haunting. Time to see what he had inherited, he thought, rolling his shoulders as he stretched his arms, feeling the latent energy simmering beneath his skin. A single wave of his hand created a faint distortion in the air, a testament to the power coursing through him. He closed his eyes briefly, focusing on the vast ocean of quirks within him, categorizing them, analyzing their potential, and feeling their essence. Opening his eyes, a sinister grin spread across his face. So many tools, so much potential. Let's organize this chaos. He conjured a notebook from nearby, a habit he hadn't yet abandoned, and began listing the quirks, testing them briefly to understand their capabilities. Each entry was accompanied by a sharp whisper, his voice carrying equal parts amazement and intent. Midoriya's list of all for one's quirks included decay, the ability to disintegrate anything he touched, super regeneration, allowing rapid healing from almost any injury, air cannon, releasing devastating blasts of compressed air, warp gate, enabling teleportation over vast distances, hypertrophy, temporarily enlarging his muscles for enhanced strength, search, locating and analyzing up to 100 people at once, infrared vision, seeing in the dark and through obstacles, impact recoil, returning the force of any attack to its origin, blade arms, transforming his arms into sharp, deadly blades, barrier, creating near-impenetrable shields of energy, enhancer, boosting physical strength and agility exponentially, shockwave emission, generating seismic energy capable of creating devastating shockwaves, black tendrils, for mid to long-range combat, energy manipulation, turning ambient energy into powerful attacks, quirk nullification, temporarily nullifying the quirks of others, voice, amplification, creating sonic attacks, telekinesis, controlling objects with his mind, fire generation, producing and controlling flames, ice manipulation, creating structures or immobilizing opponents, electric discharge, releasing electricity in devastating bursts, density control, making objects heavier or lighter, mind reading, reading the surface thoughts of others, fear inducement, projecting intense fear, and gravity manipulation, controlling gravitational forces. Izuku paused, surveying the notebook and his annotations. His breathing had steadied, and his mind was clearer than it had ever been. The sheer number of quirks at his disposal was not just overwhelming, it was exhilarating. Each one was a key to unlocking his ultimate plans. He chuckled softly, his voice cold and commanding. With this arsenal, he would reshape the world. Heroes, villains, even society itself would witness the dawn of a new era. None of them are ready for him. Closing the notebook, he stared at his reflection in the darkened glass of the training room, his black scara and white pupils glowing faintly in the dim light. This was no longer the boy who once idolized heroes. This was someone else entirely, a harbinger of change and power beyond comprehension. It wasn't just about strength, it was about control. And he would control everything. The cold, oppressive silence of the maximum security prison was only broken by the sound of deliberate footsteps echoing through the dimly lit hallway. The guards stationed nearby barely spared a glance as the tall figure passed them, their faces pale and fearful. Izuku Midoriya, clad in a dark coat that billowed behind him, moved forward with an air of absolute authority. As he reached the end of the hallway, he stopped in front of a thick steel door, its surface scratched and dented, a testament to the occupants' futile attempts at freedom. Chisaki Kai, known as Overhaul, sat hunched inside, his once pristine suit tattered, his hands gone as he stared at the floor. The man who once terrorized so many now looked small and broken. The sound of the lock clicking open made Chisaki look up, his eyes widening in shock. Standing before him was a figure he barely recognized. Izuku's face was unreadable, but his glowing eyes carried an intensity that sent a shiver down Chisaki's spine. Midoriya stepped into the cell, the door slamming shut behind him. He said nothing at first, letting the oppressive silence weigh down on Chisaki. Finally he spoke, his voice cold and detached. He was there to take something from Overhaul, something he didn't deserve to have. Chisaki's confusion quickly turned to anger as he shot to his feet. He believed he could threaten Midoriya, reminding him of who he was and what he had done. Izuku didn't respond with words. Instead, he gripped Chisaki by the throat and slammed him into the wall with enough force to crack the concrete. Chisaki gasped, struggling against Izuku's unyielding grip. Midoriya knew exactly who Chisaki was, the man who destroyed lives without a second thought. He thought he was powerful, but he was nothing compared to Izuku. His grip tightened, and Chisaki's struggles grew weaker. Without warning, Izuku released him, letting him crumple to the floor, gasping for air. Chisaki barely had time to catch his breath before Izuku kicked him hard in the ribs, sending him sprawling. He landed with a groan, clutching his side, but Izuku wasn't done. He grabbed Chisaki by the collar, lifting him off the ground effortlessly. He reminded Chisaki that he had taken away her freedom, turning her life into a nightmare. This was the least he deserved. The ensuing confrontation was brutal and relentless. Izuku didn't hold back, each strike carrying the weight of his fury. By the time he stepped back, Chisaki was barely conscious, slumped against the wall. But Izuku wasn't finished. He knelt beside Chisaki, placing a hand on his chest. A dark, ominous aura began to emanate from him as he activated his newly acquired power. Chisaki's body convulsed as Izuku's hand glowed, forcibly extracting the quirk Overhaul from him. When it was over, Chisaki collapsed to the floor, his body limp and his eyes hollow. Izuku stood, flexing his fingers as he felt the power coursing through him. The quirk was wasted on Chisaki. He would use it for something greater than his twisted ideals. He turned and walked toward the door, pausing only briefly to glance back at Chisaki, who now sat slumped and broken in the corner of his cell, his once imposing presence reduced to nothing. Izuku left him there, devoid of sympathy, believing it was more mercy than Chisaki deserved. The door slammed shut behind him, and as Izuku's footsteps faded down the hall, Chisaki was left alone in the darkness, his body battered, his quirk stolen, and his spirit utterly crushed. In another part of the prison, the clash was inevitable. Muscular had long been a lingering stain on Izuku's memory, their first battle serving as a painful reminder of his limitations. Now, Midoriya returned, a completely different person, stronger, colder, and more calculating. As the door to Muscular's cell opened, the hulking brute grinned, his eyes lighting up with twisted glee. He had been waiting for this moment, eager for round two. Izuku stepped inside, his gaze calm but icy. This wasn't a round, it was the final act. Muscular lunged, his body already bulging with his quirk's power, but Izuku was faster. Effortlessly sidestepping the attack, he delivered a devastating kick to Muscular's ribs, sending him crashing into the wall. Muscular was still just a brute with no strategy, and Izuku was no longer the same as he had been back then. The battle was over almost as soon as it began. Izuku dismantled Muscular with precision, every punch and kick calculated to inflict maximum damage. The air crackled with dark energy as he activated his quirk-stealing ability, placing his hand over Muscular's chest. The hulking man screamed as his power was ripped away from him, his once mighty frame now limp and powerless. As Muscular lay motionless on the floor, Izuku looked down at him with a mixture of contempt and closure. This was for Koda, he thought, turning and leaving without another word. The next day, the clanging of metal doors echoed through Tartarus as Midoriya entered the dimly lit containment block. His imposing presence was enough to silence even the rowdiest prisoners. Each step he took was deliberate, exuding authority as the self-proclaimed king of Tartarus. In one of the cells sat Tadou Aoi, a former martial artist known for his chaotic disdain for the hero system. Despite the dire atmosphere of the prison, Tadou's expression was casual, almost jovial, as he leaned back against the wall with his legs crossed. When he spotted Midoriya, his grin widened. He acknowledged Izuku, noting his reputation and expressing intrigue. Before getting to anything serious, he asked what kind of girls Izuku liked. Midoriya raised an eyebrow at the unexpected question, momentarily thrown off by the absurdity of it. He had been prepared for a fight, not a personal inquiry. Then his mind flickered back to one of the earlier cells he had visited, where he had dealt with a particularly annoying prisoner. On the floor of that cell, he noticed a picture of a woman. She caught his attention with her tall stature, striking physique, and confident pose in a bikini. It was an unusual detail for him to remember, but Tadou's strange question had brought it back to the forefront of his mind. Midoriya's voice was cold and detached, yet there was a hint of amusement as he described her. He noted her height, confidence, and notable figure. After a brief silence, Tadou erupted in laughter, clapping his hands together. He expressed his delight, declaring Midoriya a man of culture with good taste. Midoriya's expression remained unchanged as he crossed his arms and leaned against the wall, asking if they could move on from the small talk. Tadou wiped a tear from his eye, still chuckling, and acknowledged Midoriya's straightforwardness. He found Midoriya intriguing, a man who knew what he wanted and was willing to fight for it. Tadou then launched himself at Midoriya, his massive frame moving with surprising speed. Midoriya anticipated the attack and sidestepped with calculated precision. Tadou spun around, aiming a powerful punch at Midoriya's ribs. The impact echoed through the corridor, but Midoriya barely flinched. Midoriya complimented Tadou's strength, grabbing his arm mid-swing and twisting it. He explained that strength alone wouldn't get him far. Tadou grinned through the pain, excitement sparkling in his eyes, and urged Midoriya to show him what he had. He activated his quirk, Boogie Woogie, and in an instant, their positions swapped, leaving Tadou standing where Midoriya had been just moments before. Midoriya didn't hesitate. He had studied Tadou's ability and predicted the move. He lunged forward, his fist colliding with Tadou's chest before the larger man could react. The force of the blow sent Tadou skidding back, but he remained standing, laughing through gritted teeth. Tadou admitted that Midoriya was no joke and that it had been a while since he faced a real challenge. Midoriya tilted his head, his gaze piercing, and acknowledged Tadou's strength while questioning the purpose behind his fighting. Tadou's laughter faded, replaced by a serious expression as he revealed his disdain for the system. He believed heroes and villains were a sham, indifferent to people like them, but he saw something different in Midoriya. Midoriya nodded, a rare flicker of approval crossing his cold demeanor. He proposed that they fight together instead of against each other, aiming to create a world where strength and conviction prevailed. Tadou smirked, clapping his hands together again, this time not to attack but to accept the challenge. As the dust from their skirmish settled, Tadou stood exhilarated yet exhausted, his towering frame glistening with sweat. Midoriya appeared almost untouched, his demeanor as unshaken as ever. He stepped closer to Tadou, their gazes locking. Midoriya's voice was deep and commanding, carrying a weight that silenced the corridor. He acknowledged Tadu's strength, noting that it meant little without direction. Tadu tilted his head, his grin returning as he questioned Midoriya's intentions. Midoriya crossed his arms, exuding authority as he explained his vision. He was building something bigger than heroes and villains, a movement to dismantle the corrupt system they were trapped in. He needed people like Tadu, strong individuals with conviction who rejected the lies they had been fed. Intrigued, Tadu raised an eyebrow and urged Midoriya to continue. Midoriya expressed his desire for Tadu to be his first commander, one of the 10 people he would choose to stand by his side. Together, they would reshape the world into one where true power and vision reigned supreme. Tadu considered the offer, searching for any sign of deceit in Midoriya's unwavering determination. Finally, a wide grin spread across his face as he accepted the challenge. He acknowledged Midoriya's guts and made it clear that he would only follow someone strong, insisting that Midoriya would need to prove himself worthy of the title king. Midoriya nodded, a faint smirk playing at the corner of his lips, assuring Tadu that he would find no weakness in him. With Tadu Aoi as his first commander, Midoriya's ambitions began to take shape. Tadu's loyalty and raw power made him a formidable ally, and together, they laid the groundwork for a new era, one forged in strength, ambition, and the desire to shatter the chains of a broken system. The Tartarus Gym was dimly lit, a sanctuary for the restless souls trapped within its walls. The clang of weights and the low hum of machines filled the air as Midoriya stood shirtless, his lean yet muscular physique glistening with sweat. His movements were precise and controlled as he lifted a stack of weights far heavier than anyone in Tartarus dared to attempt. His black scara and glowing white pupils gleamed ominously in the faint light. This was not mere training for Midoriya, it was preparation for the war he intended to wage. The sound of approaching footsteps broke his focus. He lowered the weights with a metallic clang and turned his head slightly. A woman stepped into view, her presence commanding and sharp. She had an air of deadly precision, her eyes cold yet assessing. Recognizing her immediately, Midoriya addressed her flatly, asking what brought her to visit. She crossed her arms and leaned casually against a nearby pillar, revealing that she had been watching him and the chaos he stirred up around Tartarus. Midoriya stood unfazed by her scrutiny, stating that if she was there to challenge him, she should reconsider, as he had no interest in pointless fights. A small smirk played on her lips as she assured him that she was not there to fight but was curious about his intentions. Midoriya had been moving through the facility with relentless determination, acquiring quirks and forming alliances. His ultimate goal was clear. His eyes narrowed as he spoke with a cold, measured tone, expressing his desire to dismantle the existing system and rebuild it according to his vision. He believed the world was broken, and he was the only one capable of fixing it. Nagant observed him with a soft chuckle, acknowledging the weight of his words. She saw a reflection of her younger self in him, someone driven by a fierce resolve. When she stepped closer, her gaze unwavering, she revealed her understanding of the corruption within the hero system. Unlike others who hid behind a facade of righteousness, Midoriya was honest about his intentions, and she respected that. She expressed her desire to join him, emphasizing that she would not follow blindly. Their partnership would be based on mutual goals, and if their visions ever diverged, she would not hesitate to act against him. Midoriya responded with a rare smirk, warning her that if she ever aimed her weapon at him, she would not get the chance to pull the trigger. With Lady Nagant at his side, Midoriya gained not just an ally but a strategist and an assassin who understood the flaws of the hero system from within. Their alliance marked a significant step in his journey to reshape the world, each new recruit solidifying his path toward becoming the king of Tartarus. Later, while in his cell, Midoriya focused on honing his skills with a makeshift training tool. The usual sounds of Tartarus faded into the background as he concentrated. Suddenly, he heard the jingle of a guard's keys, followed by a polite knock on the metal bars, an unusual formality in such a place. The guard informed him that he had a visitor, a lawyer. Intrigued, Midoriya stood and requested to be taken to the meeting. The room was stark, with only a table and 2 chairs. A sharply dressed man sat at the table, his calm yet imposing demeanor evident as he introduced himself as Kazuki Mori, the legal representative of All for One. Midoriya, ignoring the offered handshake, inquired about the purpose of the visit. Kazuki explained that he was there to fulfill the last wishes of Midoriya's father, Shigaraki. He slid a stack of documents across the table, revealing that Shigaraki had arranged for all his remaining assets to be transferred to Midoriya, anticipating his eventual removal from the picture. Midoriya's interest peaked as Kazuki detailed the extent of the inheritance, which included wealth, properties, hidden resources, and networks. Kazuki assured him that there was no catch. Shigaraki believed in Midoriya's potential to carry on his legacy. Midoriya learned that Kazuki would serve as his advisor, offering expertise as long as he led. Kazuki then presented a sealed envelope containing a personal letter from Shigaraki, which Midoriya decided to read later. Kazuki emphasized that Shigaraki wanted Midoriya to surpass him, to become more than just the king of Tartarus but the ruler of a new era. As Midoriya gathered the documents, he commanded Kazuki to provide more details about his inheritance, including the types of people who had worked under his father and the extent of his resources. Kazuki, sensing Midoriya's sharp intellect, began to summarize the vast and multifaceted inheritance. He explained that Midoriya's father had contracts with dangerous individuals, including assassins and mercenaries, who now owed their allegiance to him. Additionally, there were quirk researchers and engineers who had worked on enhancing quirks and developing advanced technology. Finally, Kazuki revealed that Shigaraki had maintained alliances with international criminal organizations, providing strategic planning and quirk-based weaponry. With this newfound knowledge, Midoriya felt a sense of purpose solidifying within him, ready to embrace the legacy left by his father and shape the future according to his vision. They respect power above all else, and they will align with you if you show them your strength. Kazuki explained that Midoriya's father had a network of informants embedded in various government bodies and agencies worldwide. These individuals provided intelligence, cover-ups, and occasionally influenced legislation to benefit his operations. They remained active, waiting for new instructions. Kazuki continued, flipping to another section of the file. He detailed the financial assets, noting several offshore accounts containing billions in various currencies. These funds were clean and untraceable, ready for immediate use. He also mentioned dozens of properties across the globe, including mansions, safe houses, and underground bunkers, each stocked with supplies and weaponry. Kazuki described caches of advanced weaponry and technology, both quirk-based and traditional. Midoriya's father had invested heavily in experimental devices that could amplify or neutralize quirks, stored in secure locations. He also had a sizable supply of quirk-destroying bullets and experimental serums that could either suppress or enhance quirks, originally sourced from the Shai Hasaikai but later produced independently by his researchers. Kazuki pointed out that Midoriya's father maintained influence in nations beyond Japan. In several war-torn regions, he operated as both a supplier and a power broker. These connections could be activated if Midoriya chose to expand his operations globally. Midoriya absorbed the information with unnerving calmness, his mind rapidly piecing together strategies and potential uses for every asset described. He murmured about mercenaries, researchers, syndicates, and informants, leaning back and realizing he had a global empire waiting to be reclaimed. Kazuki nodded, affirming that Midoriya's father believed in power consolidation and adaptability. These resources were tools, and how Midoriya used them was up to him. Midoriya's white pupils narrowed as he inquired if there was anyone among his father's network who doubted his position. Kazuki hesitated before replying that some might require persuasion, but most were loyal to the all-for-one legacy and would fall in line once they saw Midoriya's strength. A faint smirk crossed Midoriya's face as he declared that those who doubted him would be dealt with personally. Before Kazuki could close the briefcase again, Midoriya asked one last question about the scientists and researchers. Kazuki confirmed that most were still active, working in secret facilities under strict orders to remain operational until contacted. Midoriya's tone grew colder as he instructed Kazuki to contact them, needing their expertise for the next phase of his plan. Curiosity piqued, Kazuki asked what that plan entailed. Midoriya's gaze turned distant, his voice low but resolute as he spoke of revolution, a world where the strong dominate without the facade of heroism or laws, a kingdom forged by his hands with no one above him. Kazuki smiled, closing his briefcase and promising to make the arrangements. As Kazuki turned to leave, Midoriya leaned back in his chair, his mind racing with possibilities. The king of Tartarus was no longer bound by the walls of his prison, he was already shaping the world outside it. In the dim light of Midoriya's Tartarus cell, shadows danced across the room. Seated at the center of his domain, he exuded an aura of absolute authority. His black scara and white pupils gleamed ominously as he awaited the arrival of two individuals he deemed essential to his plans, Lady Nagant and Tadou Aoi. Moments later, the heavy door creaked open, and the two figures stepped inside. Lady Nagant, calm yet commanding, leaned against the wall with her arms crossed. Tadou sauntered in casually, his sharp eyes scanning the room before settling on Midoriya. Tadou acknowledged Midoriya's call, while Lady Nagant raised an eyebrow, questioning the urgency of the summons. Midoriya smiled faintly, gesturing for them to sit, explaining that it was indeed significant. His voice carried a weight that demanded attention. Nagant and Tadou exchanged glances before taking their places on the metal stools in front of him. Midoriya leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and announced his plan to escape Tartarus in 2 to 4 days. The words hung in the air, electrifying the atmosphere. Tadou's eyebrows shot up, a grin spreading across his face as he expressed his excitement about the escape. Lady Nagant, however, remained measured, acknowledging the difficulty of breaking out of the most secure prison in existence. Midoriya confirmed that he had been preparing for this moment since the day he arrived, studying every guard, patrol route, and possible weak point. He had also accounted for contingencies, ensuring that the escape was a certainty, not a gamble. Nagant's sharp gaze softened slightly, impressed by his resolve. She asked why he was sharing this information with them. Midoriya straightened, locking his gaze onto her as he explained that he needed both of them. He detailed how Nagant's precision and ability to cover him from a distance would be crucial, while Tadou's strength and teleportation technique would help them outmaneuver anyone who stood in their way. Tadou chuckled, leaning back and accepting his role as Midoriya's ace in the hole. He inquired about Midoriya's confidence in the plan. Midoriya smirked, asserting that failure was not an option. This escape was about more than freedom. It was about taking the first step towards something greater. Nagant narrowed her eyes, wanting to know the endgame. Midoriya's expression grew serious as he outlined the next steps, gathering allies, consolidating power, and dismantling the farce of the hero system. He envisioned a world where strength determined everything, free from lies and hypocrisy. Nagant nodded slowly, acknowledging the plan. She asked if he had already decided who he wanted on his side. Midoriya's smirk returned as he revealed he had 10 positions to fill, with them being the first 2 he wanted on his team. Tadou laughed heartily, enjoying the title of First Commander, and expressed his eagerness to break out of the prison. Midoriya stood, his presence filling the room as he instructed them to act normal and not draw suspicion until the signal was given in 2 days. Nagant pushed herself off the wall, reminding him to ensure his plan lived up to expectations. Tadou clapped a hand on Midoriya's shoulder, assuring him that they would succeed. As the two left the cell, Midoriya sat back down, his mind racing with calculations. His eyes shone with unrelenting determination, ready to take on the world. The king of Tartarus was on the verge of claiming his freedom, and the world would tremble in his wake. The dimly lit halls of Tartarus felt heavier than ever as Midoriya approached Chisaki Kai's cell. The once proud leader of the Shai Hasai Kai now sat hunched in a corner, his disheveled hair hanging over his lifeless eyes. Time had stripped him of everything: his limbs, his status, his pride. Yet Midoriya saw an opportunity in his brokenness. Midoriya stood outside the reinforced glass, his black scara and white pupils glowing faintly in the light. He tapped the barrier lightly, the sound echoing through the silent wing. Chisaki stirred, his eyes narrowing as he recognized the figure before him. Chisaki growled, his voice hoarse from disuse, questioning what Midoriya wanted. Midoriya's lips curled into a faint, knowing smile as he offered Chisaki a chance at redemption or revenge, depending on how he saw it. Chisaki scoffed, bitterly dismissing the idea of redemption or revenge, claiming the heroes had taken everything from him: his family, his boss, his limbs. He felt he had nothing left. Midoriya's voice dropped, taking on a chilling, manipulative tone as he suggested that Chisaki might not be as empty as he thought. Confusion flickered in Chisaki's hollow eyes when he asked what Midoriya meant. Leaning closer, Midoriya whispered that Chisaki's old boss had not survived. The heroes had failed to save him and left him to his fate. The words struck Chisaki hard, causing his breath to hitch and his fists to clench tightly despite his missing hands. He denied the claim, but doubt crept into his voice. Midoriya maintained a calm, almost pitying expression as he questioned why he would lie. He urged Chisaki to think about it. If they couldn't save him, why would they bother with his boss? Memories of his boss, frail and bedridden, surfaced in Chisaki's mind. He had risked everything to protect the man, yet now he realized the truth. Chisaki muttered that they had let him die, his voice breaking. Midoriya nodded sympathetically, stating he was not there to gloat but to offer a way to honor his boss's memory. He proposed that they escape together and bring the broken system to its knees. Chisaki stared at him, the fire of hatred rekindling in his eyes, questioning what Midoriya would gain from this. Midoriya smirked, revealing his desire for freedom and the chance to reshape the world. He promised Chisaki the power to destroy those who had taken everything from him. Unbeknownst to Chisaki, Midoriya had already planted a safeguard. During their interaction, he had subtly used one of his newly acquired quirks to place an explosive quirk deep within Chisaki's body. As Midoriya manipulated him further over the coming days, Chisaki grew increasingly loyal, his hatred for the heroes outweighing his doubts. Midoriya played the role of a leader perfectly, feeding Chisaki's need for vengeance while ensuring he remained a pawn in the grander scheme. The plan was set into motion as Midoriya sat silently in his cell, his black scara and white pupils radiating an eerie glow. Lady Nagant and Tadou Aoi stood nearby, their eyes filled with a mix of curiosity and determination. The atmosphere was heavy with tension, signaling a pivotal moment. Midoriya's calm voice cut through the silence, announcing that it was time. Chisaki would be the distraction they needed. He instructed Nagant and Tadou to stay ready. Once the explosion happened, they would move quickly. Tadou chuckled, cracking his knuckles and expressing his approval of Midoriya's cold demeanor. Nagant nodded, her gaze sharp, questioning whether Chisaki would take the bait. Midoriya assured her that he already had, believing he was escaping to avenge his boss while remaining unaware of his role in Midoriya's game. Deep within the labyrinthine halls of Tartarus, Chisaki wandered near the walls of his cell, muttering to himself about revenge and restoration. Midoriya, focusing on the mental connection to the explosive quirk he had planted, commanded it to detonate with a single thought. The explosion ripped through the air, shaking the entire prison. The walls of Chisaki's cell crumbled as smoke and debris filled the corridor. Alarms blared, and guards shouted orders to contain the chaos. Midoriya opened his eyes, a cold satisfaction flickering within them, and declared it was done. With the guards distracted and the prison in disarray, Midoriya wasted no time. Using his telekinesis, he enveloped himself, Nagant, and Tadou in an invisible field, lifting them effortlessly off the ground. He instructed them to hold on, his voice calm but commanding. As they soared through the air, the scene below was chaotic. Guards scrambled to contain the destruction caused by Chisaki's explosion, oblivious to the trio flying just above them. Midoriya focused, extending his invisibility quirk to cloak their presence. Tadou, gripping tightly to the telekinetic field, expressed his admiration for Midoriya's exit strategy. Nagant smirked, acknowledging Midoriya's resourcefulness. He remained stoic, his gaze fixed ahead, declaring that this was just the beginning. They would not stop until they were far beyond their reach. Eventually, they landed in a secluded forest far from Tartarus. The cool night air contrasted sharply with the fiery chaos they had left behind. Midoriya released his telekinetic hold, allowing them to touch down gently. Nagant stretched her arms, letting out a rare laugh, while Deku leaned against a tree, grinning widely and praising Midoriya's plan. Midoriya's expression remained unchanged as he stated that Chisaki was merely a means to an end. Sacrifices must be made for the greater plan. Intrigued, Nagant asked about the plan. Midoriya turned to face them, his eerie gaze burning with intensity as he revealed his vision to build something stronger than any hero or villain had ever seen. They were just the beginning. They would gather power, resources, and allies, and then reshape the world in their image. The silence that followed was heavy but carried an unspoken agreement. Midoriya's vision was bold, dangerous, and undeniably captivating. Together, they were free, but their journey was only beginning. As the moonlight filtered through the dense canopy of the forest, Midoriya stepped away from Nagant and Deku, pulling a small device from his pocket. The faint hum of static greeted him as he activated it, holding it close to his face. He spoke with cold precision, announcing that he had made it out and had 2 more with him, instructing them to get to his location. Midoriya stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the sleek black suit he had chosen for the day. It was sharp and commanding, a symbol of his growing influence. He slid on a pair of tinted glasses, the final touch to complete the look. Today's meeting was significant. It was a gathering of his father's most powerful allies, heads of various families, and individuals who controlled underground networks. This was the day he would solidify his presence as a leader. Nagant leaned against the wall behind him, her gaze sharp and appraising. She commented that the suit looked good on him, fitting the image he was trying to project. Deku smirked, his hands in his pockets, and remarked that Midoriya looked sharp, hoping the meeting would be as interesting as he had promised. Midoriya focused on the cuffs of his shirt before turning to face them, his expression calm yet authoritative. He signaled that it was time to go. With a single step, Midoriya activated the teleportation quirk he had acquired, a swirling mist engulfing him and his 2 allies. The sensation was brief, and in an instant, they were transported to a grand, dimly lit room. The space was expansive, with a large oval table at its center, surrounded by some of the most influential figures in the underworld. Heads turned as the mist dissipated, revealing Midoriya flanked by Nagant and Deku. His presence commanded immediate attention, the room falling silent as he strode confidently to the head of the table. The suit, coupled with his aura of authority, left no doubt in anyone's mind this was not the boy they might have underestimated. This was someone ready to claim his position. As he took his seat, Midoriya's voice broke the silence, calm yet filled with purpose. He addressed the gathering, stating that he had called them to discuss the future. His father may no longer be in charge, but his legacy would not fade. Midoriya intended to take it further, bringing all of them into an era of strength and prosperity. The room buzzed with murmurs, but no one dared interrupt. Nagant and Deku stood behind him, their presence reinforcing the weight of his words. Midoriya leaned forward slightly, his gaze piercing as he surveyed the room. He noted that the world was changing, heroes were faltering, and their system was more fragile than ever. Together, they would reshape it, but first he needed to know who among them was truly loyal to this cause. He gestured subtly, and a holographic map of the world appeared in the center of the table, highlighting key regions under his father's influence. These were the assets they currently controlled, but this was only the beginning. With their cooperation and his leadership, they could expand far beyond these borders. The family heads exchanged glances, some nodding in agreement while others remained skeptical. One man, older and with a scar running down his cheek, challenged Midoriya, questioning what guarantees he could provide that he could handle this responsibility. Midoriya cut him off with a sharp glare, his voice cold and unwavering. He reminded them that his father had trusted them to uphold his vision. If they doubted him, they were free to leave, but those who stood with him would rise, and those who opposed him would fall. The room fell silent once more, the weight of his words sinking in. Nagant smirked subtly, and Deku chuckled under his breath. Midoriya had made his position clear, and the room now understood that this was no ordinary meeting. This was the beginning of a new era, one that would be shaped by his vision and his will. The atmosphere shifted as the scarred man rose from his seat, his voice cold and challenging. He stated that if Midoriya wanted them to follow him, he would have to prove he was worthy, suggesting they settle this the old way, a fight for the head position. Midoriya's eyes gleamed, his face unreadable. He slowly removed his coat, folding it neatly and handing it to Nagant, accepting the challenge. The man smirked, cracking his knuckles, warning Midoriya not to expect him to go easy. Midoriya stepped into the center of the room, his movements calm and composed. His allies, Nagant and Deku, watched from the sidelines, both unfazed but curious. The room grew eerily quiet as the two opponents faced each other. The fight began with the man lunging at Midoriya, throwing a powerful punch. Midoriya sidestepped effortlessly, his movements precise and fluid. Before the man could recover, Midoriya struck, landing a blow that sent him reeling. The sound of impact echoed through the room as Midoriya continued his relentless assault, each strike calculated and devastating. The scarred man struggled to defend himself, but Midoriya's speed and strength overwhelmed him. The atmosphere grew tense as the fight unfolded, showcasing Midoriya's skill and determination. When it was over, the man lay defeated on the floor, his pride shattered along with his body. The dimly lit room carried an oppressive atmosphere, heightened by the aftermath of the confrontation. Midoriya stood at the center, his back facing the rest of the crowd, his hands stained with the evidence of the battle. The once proud head of the opposition lay defeated, and around him, his loyal followers were too terrified to move. Midoriya slowly turned his head, revealing his intense gaze. His black scara and glowing white pupils cut through the shadows, an unrelenting presence that sent shivers down the spines of everyone present. The room was deathly silent as he addressed the remaining heads, asking if anyone else had a problem like the man who had just fallen. No one dared move or speak. Each breath was held as the fear of drawing his attention gripped the remaining family heads. The oppressive air around Midoriya made it clear challenging him meant more than defeat, it meant utter destruction. His gaze swept over the room, locking eyes with each person for a brief moment, ensuring his message was clear. Satisfied, he adjusted his coat, ignoring the remnants of the confrontation on his hands. The air felt heavier as he moved back to his seat, each step a quiet reminder of his dominance. He murmured that it was time to proceed, his tone calm yet menacing. As the meeting concluded and the room began to empty, Midoriya remained seated, his piercing gaze locked on the retreating figures of the family heads. He glanced at Deku and Nagant, signaling them to stay behind. The room fell silent once more, leaving only the sound of the faint wind seeping through the cracks in the walls. Midoriya announced his decision regarding the commanders, his voice calm yet commanding. These positions weren't merely for show, they were the backbone of what they were building. Only those worthy of carrying the weight of this family's future would stand by his side. Deku Aoi nodded, his expression serious, curious about Midoriya's choices. Midoriya turned to him, his black scara eyes narrowing slightly. He named Aoi and Nagant as two of the commanders, acknowledging their strength and loyalty. The third would be someone with the power to crush mountains and the wisdom to guide armies. He already had candidates in mind, assets they could rely on. Nagant tilted her head, intrigued, and asked when they would meet these candidates. Midoriya replied that it wasn't time yet. He stood up and walked toward the open balcony that overlooked the city. When he stepped onto the balcony, the moonlight bathed his figure, and the weight of his authority rippled through the air as he gazed up at the vast night sky. For a moment, there was only silence, broken by his words that resonated like a decree. He spoke of those who knew not the absence of power, urging them to look toward the sky with their shattered egos. The one sky that no one could enter until the king was roused from his slumber. His words hung in the air like a proclamation, carrying the weight of his determination and vision. Behind him, Nagant and Deku Aoi exchanged glances, understanding the gravity of his message. This was not just a declaration of his authority, it was a promise to the world that Midoriya was ready to claim his rightful place at the top. The night stretched on, but the resolve in Midoriya's eyes was unwavering. The king had indeed awakened, and the world would soon come to know the full extent of his power. As he stood on the balcony, his proclamation hung in the air like an unshakable decree. The weight of his words was not just for the family heads. It reflected his journey, his pain, and his transformation. The king he spoke of was not merely a title or symbol but a testament to the strength forged from his brokenness. Once shattered by the world's cruelty, Midoriya had rebuilt himself into something far greater, something unyielding. He clenched his fists briefly, gazing at his hands. Brokenness, he thought, was not the end, it was the beginning. His voice was low, but Tadu, Aoi and Nagant heard him, their eyes reflecting newfound respect for the man they followed. With a deep breath, Midoriya turned, his expression sharp and composed. He walked back into the room, removing the coat that bore the marks of his past encounters. A nearby subordinate quickly handed him a clean towel, and he wiped his hands meticulously, erasing the last traces of the encounter. When he was done, he donned a fresh black coat that amplified his already intimidating presence. He adjusted the collar and turned toward Tadu, Aoi and Nagant. He commanded them to come, his voice steady but firm. Without hesitation, they followed him. Midoriya raised his hand, activating his teleportation ability, and in a flash, they disappeared from the family estate. In an instant, they reappeared at their base, a fortress of steel and shadows that reflected Midoriya's ironclad resolve. The air was heavy with purpose, filled with the faint hum of machinery and quiet murmurs of loyal allies. Midoriya stepped forward, his boots echoing against the floor, and glanced over his shoulder at Tadu, Aoi and Nagant. He declared that this base was not just a sanctuary, it was a symbol of their strength, a place where they would build the future he envisioned. His gaze sharpened, and his tone became unyielding as he stated that with them by his side, there was nothing they could not accomplish. Tadu, Aoi smirked, nodding in agreement, while Nagant's voice was equally firm, expressing their commitment to follow him. Midoriya's eyes softened for a moment, grateful for their loyalty, but he knew that this path was as dangerous as it was necessary. Turning back to the base, he walked forward, his mind already focused on the challenges ahead. The king had awakened, and now it was time to reshape the world. The scene shifted to a bright morning at UA High School, where Katsuki Bakugo entered Class 2A with his usual scowl. The classroom buzzed with chatter, filled with laughter and discussions about training sessions. Bakugo ignored it all, heading straight to his seat and slamming his bag down with a grunt, muttering about the distractions around him. As the bell rang, Aizawa shuffled into the classroom, his perpetually tired expression unchanged. He instructed the class to settle down, pulling out his lesson plan. The students quieted, ready for the day's lesson. However, just as Aizawa began to speak, a faint pinging sound echoed through the room as everyone's phones vibrated simultaneously. Curious, the students pulled out their devices. Bakugo furrowed his brow, wondering what was happening. Before anyone could say anything, Aizawa's voice cut through the murmurs, commanding them to put their phones away, including Kaminari. He urged them to focus on the lesson, stating that whatever it was could wait. Reluctantly, the students complied, though some kept their phones hidden under their desks. Suddenly, Aizawa's phone vibrated as well. He glanced at the notification, and his normally calm demeanor shifted subtly. Without another word, he shut his phone off and walked toward the door, stating he needed to speak with Principal Nizu and instructing the class to stay focused on their assignments. As soon as he left the room, the students erupted into whispers. They speculated about what could be happening, with Mina leaning over to Kirishima, expressing her concern. Unable to resist the growing tension, several students sneaked glances at their phones. Bakugo scoffed but ultimately pulled out his own device. His eyes widened slightly as he stared at the headline plastered across the screen. Izuku Midoriya escapes high-security prison authorities scramble to contain threat. A wave of shock rippled through the room. Ida whispered in disbelief about Midoriya's escape. Mina covered her mouth, astonished at how he could have broken free from what was supposed to be an unbreakable prison. Todoroki's usually stoic expression faltered as he acknowledged the seriousness of the situation. Bakugo's grip on his phone tightened as he glared at the screen, his mind racing with questions, but one thought dominated: Deku. What was happening? In Principal Nizu's office, Aizawa entered to find Nizu and All Might seated across from one another. The atmosphere was tense. All Might, his face drawn with concern, turned to Aizawa as he stepped in. Aizawa sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. The report seemed to confirm the troubling news. He was out, and no one knew how he managed it. All Might's hands clenched into fists, a mix of guilt and worry clouding his expression. He needed to find him. There was no telling what he might do. Nizu interjected, his calm demeanor betraying the gravity of the situation. Before they acted, they needed to assess the situation carefully. Midoriya's escape raised questions not just about how he managed it, but what his intentions were now. Aizawa nodded, his face grim. They needed to prepare for the worst. If he had gone rogue, they would have to stop him, no matter what. The room fell silent, the weight of their task settling heavily on their shoulders. Outside, the students of Class 1A grappled with the revelation, the image of their once friend and classmate now painted in a chilling new light. In the tense atmosphere of Principal Nizu's office, Aizawa absorbed the troubling news All Might had just shared. The silence was broken by Nizu, who mentioned that there was something else the media hadn't disclosed yet. Aizawa raised an eyebrow, his expression growing darker. What was it? Nizu sighed, folding his hands. Alongside Midoriya's escape, two others had managed to break out, Lady Nagant and a young man by the name of Tadu Aoi. The name seemed to ring a bell for Aizawa. He narrowed his eyes and leaned forward slightly. Tadu Aoi? The boy who was supposedly the protege of Yuki Tsukumo, the so-called hero, who barely lifted a finger to help and spent all her time globetrotting? All Might's eyebrows furrowed, clearly familiar with the controversial reputation of Yuki Tsukumo. Aoi had been detained for his involvement in a classified incident, something even the Hero Commission refused to disclose. Nizu nodded solemnly. Tadu Aoi wasn't just any escapee, he was an incredibly dangerous variable. From what they had gathered, his potential and abilities rivaled even some of the best pro-heroes. Yuki Tsukumo may not have been much for conventional hero work, but her teaching methods seemed to have created someone formidable. Aizawa rubbed his temples, muttering that it was just great. As if Midoriya wasn't enough of a headache already. Had they contacted Tsukumo about this? Nizu shook his head. Not yet. Tsukumo had always been elusive, and tracking her down was proving difficult. But they were prioritizing it. If anyone had insight into Tadu Aoi's plans or mindset, it would be her. Aizawa scoffed, noting her evasiveness. It was typical of her. They might as well prepare for the worst. If Tadu Aoi was involved and aligned himself with Nagant or Midoriya, things were going to spiral out of control fast. All Might clenched his fists. They couldn't let this happen. Midoriya, Nagant, and Aoi together could pose an unprecedented threat not just to the heroes, but to society itself. Nizu, ever calm, nodded. They needed to act swiftly but intelligently. He would reach out to their contacts, including any resources Yuki Tsukumo might have left behind. In the meantime, they had to prepare to brief other heroes and reinforce security around all sensitive locations. Aizawa sighed, his usual exhaustion now mixed with visible frustration. They were juggling way too many problems at once. They could only hope to get a step ahead before things exploded. The weight of the situation hung heavily over the room. As they finalized their plans, the threat posed by Izuku Midoriya, Lady Nagant, and Tadu Aoi loomed large, a storm waiting to break across the hero world. Meanwhile, the atmosphere in Class 1A was suffocating. Fear, regret, and unease filled the room as the students stared at their phones, their trembling fingers scrolling through the breaking news about Izuku Midoriya's prison escape. The media speculated wildly, showing images of the broken Tartarus gates and recounting Izuku's past exploits, both heroic and villainous. Kaminari muttered that he couldn't believe it. He really escaped. What was he going to do now? Jairu said quietly that they knew what he was going to do. He was coming for them. For revenge. Mina, usually so cheerful, was pale. They had betrayed him, all of them, even when they knew he was innocent. Katsuki Bakugo sat at his desk, glaring at the screen with clenched fists. He hoped he wouldn't come after them. Deep down, he knew Midoriya had every reason to do so. In a dimly lit hideout, Midoriya sat on a high-end couch, his expression cold and unreadable. The flickering light of a monitor illuminated his sharp features, his black sclera and white pupils giving him an otherworldly, almost haunting appearance. He clenched his fists, the familiar pang of longing tightening in his chest. He needed to get his mom's ashes. His voice was barely above a whisper, but his words hung heavy in the air, carrying with them a determination that felt unshakable. He turned to Lady Nagant and Tadu Aoi, who stood silently nearby. They would stay here. He would handle this alone. His voice carried the weight of someone who was no longer the broken boy they once knew, but a king ready to claim what was his. Before they could respond, he disappeared, his form vanishing in a dark haze as he teleported. The living room of the Bakugo household was eerily quiet when Midoriya appeared, his presence sending an immediate chill through the air. Mitsuki Bakugo, who had been sitting on the couch, froze as she saw him. She didn't recognize him at first. The black sclera, the cold, emotionless face, and his jet-black hair made him look like a stranger. But then, something familiar sparked in her mind. Izuku? She whispered, her voice trembling. Midoriya gave her a faint smile, one that carried neither warmth nor malice, only a cold indifference. He greeted her calmly, as though he wasn't a wanted fugitive who had escaped prison just days ago. Mitsuki's hands trembled as she got up, her instincts torn between fear and the maternal love she had once felt for the boy who had grown up alongside her son. She stammered that she would make some tea, avoiding his piercing gaze. Midoriya watched her move to the kitchen in silence, his mind calculating every step. He knew she was scared. How could she not be? He wasn't the same Izuku Midoriya she remembered. But she also hadn't called for help. That, at least, he could respect. When she returned with tea, they sat quietly. Mitsuki didn't dare speak, but her eyes flickered with unease as they darted to his inhuman eyes and the ominous air he carried. Midoriya took a sip of the tea, his expression unchanging. He finally thanked her, breaking the silence. Mitsuki blinked, startled by the unexpected gratitude. She hesitated, unsure of how to respond to his words. He explained that he was thankful for her help with his mother's funeral. His voice remained steady, but there was a heaviness in his tone that made her chest tighten. Mitsuki swallowed hard, still processing the situation. Before she could gather her thoughts, Midoriya stood, his presence looming over her. He stated that she would be spared, but her son would not have the same chance. Mitsuki's eyes widened in horror, and before she could react he moved swiftly, rendering her unconscious with a precise strike. As her body slumped onto the couch, Midoriya crouched down, a faint glow emanating from his hand as he used his quirk to erase her memory of the encounter. He murmured that she didn't need to remember this, his tone almost gentle. With purpose, he moved through the house, collecting items that belonged to his mother, her sweater, her degree, and a few cherished keepsakes. Once finished, he glanced back at Mitsuki, her unconscious form lying peacefully on the couch, and without a word he teleported away. Midoriya reappeared in his old apartment, the air thick with dust and the faint scent of neglect. Each step through the familiar space tightened his chest as memories of his childhood flooded back his mother's laughter, her unwavering love. He methodically gathered everything she had left behind, ensuring no memory was forgotten. Then, as he opened the fridge, he froze. Inside, preserved as if waiting for him, was a serving of katsudon, his favorite dish. It was old but still intact, a testament to his mother's care and love, even in her final days. Midoriya's breath hitched as he took the bowl out, quietly heating it. The apartment was silent except for the faint hum of the microwave. When the dish was ready, he sat at the small table, his hands trembling slightly as he took his first bite. The familiar taste washed over him, and for the first time in years, tears began to fall silently down his stoic face. The pain in his heart was evident in every tear that escaped. He finished the katsudon in silence, replaying every moment he had shared with his mother. Her voice, her smile, her unyielding love all felt distant yet close. As he set the bowl down, he whispered, his voice cracking for the first time in what felt like an eternity, expressing his sorrow. He stood, collecting the last of her belongings, and teleported back to his base, leaving behind the empty apartment that once held his happiest memories. Midoriya reappeared in his hideout, the soft hum of energy from his teleportation quirk fading into the stillness of the room. Lady Nagant and Tadu Aoi were seated nearby, the faint tension of the bass replaced with an uneasy silence as they noticed the change in his demeanor. His usual cold and calculating presence seemed heavier, his movements slower, as if the weight of his actions had finally settled on his shoulders. Nagant glanced up, her sharp eyes narrowing slightly as she took in his appearance. She asked if he had gotten what he needed. Midoriya nodded, placing the items he had taken on a table: a neatly folded sweater, a framed degree, a few personal trinkets, and finally, an urn containing his mother's ashes. His hands lingered on the urn for a moment before he straightened, his face once again a mask of emotionless resolve. He replied that he had gathered everything important, his voice calm but strained. Tadu Aoi observed him from his seat, unwrapping a fresh lollipop as he remarked that Midoriya was quieter than usual and questioned if something had happened. Midoriya didn't respond immediately. He walked over to a basin of water nearby and began to wash his hands, scrubbing away the faint remnants of dust and grime from the apartment. He looked at his reflection in the rippling water, the black sclera and white pupils staring back at him like a stranger. Finally, he admitted that he had eaten his mother's katsudon, his voice barely audible. Nagant and Tadu exchanged a glance, the weight of those words sinking in. It wasn't just about the food, it was about the connection, the memories, the life he had lost. Nagant stepped closer, her expression softening just enough to be noticeable, prompting him gently for more. Midoriya dried his hands on a towel, his movements methodical. He explained that while it tasted the same, everything felt different now. The room fell into a heavy silence, the unspoken pain in his words filling the air. Nagant placed a hand on his shoulder, her grip firm but understanding, reminding him that he didn't have to carry it all alone. Tadu chimed in, his tone casual but sincere, offering his support if Midoriya ever wanted to talk or fight it out. Midoriya gave them both a faint nod, his gaze flickering to the items on the table as he expressed his gratitude, a rare moment of vulnerability. He turned away, his mind already shifting back to the tasks ahead. There was no time for mourning, no space for vulnerability, not yet. He had plans to make, allies to gather, and enemies to confront. But as he moved to the center of the room, preparing to focus on his next steps, he whispered one final thought, almost too soft to hear, about how his mother would have liked them both. Nagant and Tadu froze, momentarily stunned by his words. But before they could respond, Midoriya straightened, his cold, calculating demeanor returning like a mask firmly in place. He declared that they had work to do, commanding them to prepare themselves as they were just getting started. With that, the king who had risen from his slumber resumed his march toward destiny, carrying the weight of his past in silence, even as the fire of his resolve burned brighter than ever. Aizawa rushed to the teacher's office faster than he had ever moved before. His heart raced, his mind plagued with questions. This wasn't just another crisis, it was personal, something that struck deep within him and his colleagues. Upon entering the teacher's office, Aizawa found his colleagues already gathered. Mike, Midnight, Nizu, and even All Might, their faces drawn in concern. The air was heavy with tension, and the weight of the situation pressed down on everyone present. Aizawa took a breath, breaking the strained silence by asking if the rumors were true. Everyone in the room understood he was referring to the explosion at Tartarus. The news was spreading rapidly. 3 inmates had escaped: Izuku Midoriya, Lady Nagant, and Almeida. Each of them was dangerous in their own way, raising countless questions. Nizu nodded solemnly, his tiny paws folded in front of him, confirming that Midoriya, Nagant, and Tadu had all escaped, and as of now, there were no leads on their whereabouts. What about Yuki Tsukumo? And Detective Tsukachi? Why haven't we heard anything from them? Nizu's expression darkened as he responded. Detective Tsukachi remained unavailable, working closely with the commission to assess the situation at Tartarus. As for Yuki Tsukumo, she had gone missing, and while they suspected her involvement, nothing was confirmed. The room fell silent, the weight of Nizu's words heavy on everyone. Months ago, when Izuku Midoriya had first been arrested, Aizawa had believed it was the right decision. The evidence had seemed irrefutable, A notebook filled with detailed information about every hero, including their quirks and weaknesses. Names like Endeavor, MP Lady, Death Arms, and even Aizawa himself were listed with unsettling precision. Additionally, Bakugo had accused Midoriya, claiming he was the traitor leaking information to the League of Villains. This combination of evidence had led to Midoriya's arrest. Aizawa had pushed for the arrest, convinced it was the logical choice, despite a nagging voice in the back of his mind. Now, with Midoriya's escape, everything was being questioned. Midnight broke the silence, voicing her concerns. She felt the situation was unfair and questioned whether they were absolutely certain Midoriya was the traitor. Her words challenged the narrative they had all accepted, causing Aizawa to clench his fists. Midnight had expressed her doubts from the beginning, and now they resonated with others in the room. Aizawa felt the weight of her words as she pressed him, expressing her frustration. She pointed out that he had always believed Midoriya was guilty but had never considered other possibilities. They had only heard one side of the story, the side presented by that notebook and possibly Bakugo's bias. Midnight bluntly accused Aizawa of favoring Bakugo, suggesting that he had let that bias blind him, leaving Midoriya without a chance. The room fell silent, and Aizawa felt the sting of her words, realizing their truth. He had been harder on Midoriya than any other student, and now he wondered if that bias had led him to make a terrible mistake. Meanwhile, the next day, the remaining members of Class 1A struggled to process the news. Uraraka, Ida, Tsuyu, and Shoto sat in silence, their heads bowed in shock. Kaminari fidgeted nervously, while Kirishima and Siro exchanged worried glances. Katsuki Bakugo, however, sat with his usual brooding expression, his hands clenched into fists. Beneath his rage there was fear. He had been the loudest voice accusing Midoriya, planting the idea that Midoriya was the traitor. Now, with Midoriya free, Bakugo began to realize the consequences of his actions. Flashback, framing Midoriya. Months earlier, the group had casually discussed Midoriya in the dorms. What began as light-hearted banter quickly turned darker. Kirishima had remarked that Midoriya was a bit much, always taking notes and muttering during practice. Uraraka had added that he acted nice, but it felt fake. Bakugo had sneered, claiming Midoriya had always begged for attention since middle school. It didn't take long for Bakugo to propose framing Midoriya as the traitor, suggesting that his notebook could easily be spun as evidence of spying. The others, fueled by frustration and jealousy, had gone along with it. They had watched as Midoriya was taken away, convinced they had rid themselves of a problem. But now, with Midoriya free, guilt began to eat at them. Back in the teacher's office, Aizawa stood by the window, staring out at the training grounds but not really seeing them. Midnight's words echoed in his mind, "You never gave him a chance." Nizu spoke again, his voice soft but firm, stating that they didn't have all the answers yet, but the situation was far more complex than they initially thought. For now, they needed to focus on maintaining order at UA, while the police handled the investigation. Aizawa nodded reluctantly, but deep down he couldn't shake the feeling that they had made a terrible mistake and that Midoriya, Nagant, and Tadu were only the beginning of their problems. As he reflected on Nemuri's words and the depth of his involvement, he recalled a flashback. It should have changed everything months ago. Nemuri's voice had exploded through the room, her usual playful demeanor replaced by unbridled fury. She had marched up to Aizawa, jabbing a finger into his chest. She accused him of knowing it was wrong from the start and letting his bias blind him. Aizawa had stepped back, startled by her outburst. He tried to defend himself, citing the overwhelming evidence against Midoriya, but Nemuri had cut him off, insisting he had favored Bakugo from the start and had never properly looked at Midoriya. "Do you even know what happened after you threw him in Tartarus?" she had continued, her voice shaking with emotion. She revealed that no one had been there for Inko Midoriya's funeral, not Aizawa, not Nizu, not All Might. It had only been her and Mitsuki Bakugo. Aizawa had frozen, pale and speechless as she recounted how civilians had booed at Inko's grave, blaming her for raising a traitor. Nemuri had fought to move the grave to a secret location, stating that she and Mitsuki were the only ones who cared. Midoriya appeared in Garaki's dimly lit lab with a sudden crackle of energy, the air around him shifting ominously. His black sclera and white pupils glowed faintly in the sterile environment. Beside him stood Aoi Tadu, towering and scanning the lab like a predator. On the other side, Lady Nagant had her sniper rifle trained on Garaki, ready to act at a moment's notice. Garaki turned abruptly, his expression a mix of fear and irritation as he recognized Midoriya. He greeted him with a trembling voice, adjusting his glasses and questioning what brought him there, clearly not expecting a pleasant reunion. Midoriya interrupted him with a cold, emotionless tone that silenced the doctor immediately. It seemed that Garaki had been making quite a bit of use of Midoriya's father's money. Midoriya walked slowly toward the doctor, each step echoing ominously in the sterile room. Garaki adjusted his glasses, struggling to maintain his composure under Midoriya's piercing gaze. He stammered, claiming that the contributions were essential to his research. Midoriya's tone was sharp as he confronted Garaki, refusing to let him twist his words. He accused the doctor of stealing from his father, funneling his wealth into personal experiments, and pretending it was all for a noble cause. His white pupils narrowed, and the black sclera made his gaze appear even more menacing. Tadu stepped forward, cracking his knuckles as he added that using someone else's money without permission was a dangerous game. Nagant's voice rang out from above, cold and calculating, warning Garaki to think twice about trying to talk his way out of the situation. She was ready with her rifle, waiting for the word. Garaki's composure crumbled further, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. He raised his hands in a gesture of surrender, pleading for understanding and claiming to be a scientist whose work was for the advancement of knowledge. Midoriya interrupted him, his voice chillingly calm as he stated that Garaki had done nothing but build weapons and destruction, squandering his father's legacy on atrocities. He was there to put an end to it. Garaki's usual arrogance vanished as he trembled, asking what Midoriya wanted. He offered information, resources, anything to appease him. Midoriya's tone dropped dangerously low as he demanded that Garaki stop using what didn't belong to him. No more experiments, no more schemes, and no more stealing from his family. The room fell into an oppressive silence, the weight of Midoriya's words suffocating. Garaki nodded shakily, his hands trembling as he muttered his understanding. Midoriya turned without another word, his black hair catching the faint light as he began to leave. Tadu cast a final glance at Garaki, his grin widening, hinting at the doctor's luck in having Midoriya's patience. Nagant lowered her rifle but kept her eyes on the doctor as she followed the others. Midoriya's eyes gleamed with a cold, menacing light as he looked down at Garaki, stating that he wanted one specific thing, the quirk of the Nomu that Garaki had sent to the training camp, the one with the chainsaw. He demanded that Garaki extract it and give it to him. Garaki's face paled, and he stammered that the Nomu's quirks were not easy to handle. Midoriya cut him off, coldly insisting that it was not his problem and that Garaki would figure it out. He also demanded information on someone named Celine, motioning toward an image of the woman with piercing blue eyes and sleek combat attire resting on a nearby table. He wanted everything Garaki had on her. Garaki's hands trembled as he processed the demands, claiming that gathering information on Celine might take time. Midoriya interrupted again, firmly stating that Garaki had 24 hours. If he didn't have the information by then, everything Garaki had worked on would cease to exist, and he would be erased from the world. The finality of Midoriya's words sent a chill down Garaki's spine. Lady Nagant, still above with her sniper aimed, advised Garaki to listen closely, as Midoriya was not one to make empty threats. Tadu smirked, emphasizing that Garaki had two options, comply or face obliteration. Garaki swallowed hard, nodding frantically and assuring Midoriya that he would get it done. He promised to deliver the quirk and the information within 24 hours. Midoriya gave the doctor a lingering, icy stare before turning to leave, reminding him to see that he did. After issuing his final warning, Midoriya paused, narrowing his eyes in thought. He then instructed Garaki to call Kurogyri, wanting to finish something with the League of Villains. Garaki hesitated but reached for a nearby console, agreeing to contact him immediately. Nagant shifted her stance, keeping her sniper trained on Garaki, warning him not to stall. Midoriya nodded, folding his arms as he waited. The faint hum of the machines filled the tense silence of the lab, and soon a swirling portal of black mist appeared, coalescing into the familiar form of Kurogyri. His glowing eyes scanned the room before settling on Midoriya. Kurogyri greeted Midoriya, his voice smooth yet wary, asking what prompted this unexpected summons. Midoriya stepped forward, his tone sharp and commanding, stating that there were loose ends with the League that he needed to tie up and that Kurogyri would take him to them now. Kurogyri tilted his head slightly, the mist around him rippling as he considered the request. He noted that the League's movements were unpredictable and questioned if this was the right time. Midoriya's gaze hardened, and the air around him grew heavier as he insisted that Kurogyri open the portal. Tadu smirked, stepping up beside Midoriya, suggesting that it would be an interesting reunion and urging Kurogyri not to keep them waiting. With a sigh, Kurogyri bowed his head slightly and opened the portal, revealing a dimly lit hideout on the other side. Midoriya glanced at Nagant and Tadu, instructing them to follow as it was time to remind the League who they were dealing with. Without waiting for a response, he stepped through the portal, radiating authority and unrelenting purpose, with Nagant and Todo close behind, ready for whatever awaited them. As Shigaraki's hands twitched, activating his decay quirk, Nagant moved faster than anyone could react. Her sniper fired, landing a perfect shot on Shigaraki's hand, forcing him to recoil in pain. His fingers spasmed, the deadly decay dissipating before it could reach Midoriya. Shigaraki glared at Midoriya with fury, but before he could make another move, Midoriya's expression darkened as he grabbed Shigaraki by the head. The room echoed with a sickening crunch as Midoriya's strength overwhelmed Shigaraki, who collapsed lifelessly at his feet. Silence enveloped the space, with everyone from Kurogyri to the remaining League members frozen in shock. Midoriya stood tall over Shigaraki's body, his presence now utterly commanding and terrifying. He regarded the fallen villain with disdain, noting how he had been nothing more than a broken tool, a product of his father's twisted experiments. Shigaraki had never been fit to lead, only to self-destruct. Midoriya requested a towel and water, cleaning the remnants of their confrontation from his hands. Now possessing the decay quirk his father had given to Shigaraki, he wiped his hands clean. He declared that his father was dead, that All for One was no more, and that the era of manipulation had ended. Midoriya was now the one in control of the League of Villains. Kurogyri straightened slightly, his mist swirling as if absorbing the gravity of the declaration. The remaining members exchanged nervous glances, the weight of Midoriya's proclamation settling in their minds. Midoriya continued, his tone icy, stating he had no patience for disobedience or incompetence. Shigaraki had been a failure, a shattered puppet of his father's will. Now, the League would answer only to him, and under his leadership, they would reshape everything. He turned sharply to Kurogyri, commanding him to call all the members immediately. Those who refused or questioned his authority would face severe consequences. Kurogyri nodded, his loyalty fully aligned with Midoriya, and promised to summon them at once. Midoriya's emerald eyes glinted with determination and cold fury as he crossed his arms, declaring they had work to do. A new order was beginning, and he would not tolerate any weakness. Nagant, standing nearby with her sniper resting on her shoulder, smirked slightly, noting that the League had just gained a real leader, which earned a chuckle from Tadu. Midoriya remained focused on the future, stating that by sunrise, the League would know exactly who he was and what he stood for. This was the beginning of a new reign, one far beyond his father's reach. Suddenly, a grotesque Nomu, equipped with the tool quirk, teleported before him. Its twisted body exuded raw power, and the chainsaw blades protruding from its arms hummed ominously. Midoriya was unfazed, his emerald eyes gleaming with icy determination. He stepped forward as his cursed energy surged, reaching out with a hand glowing with sinister energy. The Nomu's quirk was torn from its body and absorbed seamlessly into Midoriya's own. The creature crumbled lifelessly to the ground as Midoriya's body began to morph. Metallic chainsaws erupted from his arms and head, spinning to life with a deafening roar. His entire form radiated an aura of pure chaos, resembling a figure straight out of a pre-Quirk-era manga. Midoriya examined his new form, flexing his arms as the chainsaws revved menacingly. A smirk tugged at his lips as he recognized the power he now wielded, reminiscent of Chainsaw Man. Nagant raised an eyebrow, intrigued by his transformation. She asked what he planned to do with that form. Midoriya replied that Selene, with her powerful vampire quirk, wouldn't stand a chance against him. The chainsaws would disrupt her regeneration, allowing him to cut through her invincibility effortlessly. He instructed Kurogyri to prepare a training ground where he could test this new power to its limits. Kurogyri nodded without hesitation, opening a swirling portal and confirming that the training ground was ready. Without another word, Midoriya stepped into the portal, the roar of his chainsaws echoing ominously as he disappeared into the void. Behind him, Nagant and Kurogyri exchanged glances, both aware that with this new power, Midoriya was preparing to become an unstoppable force. 24 hours later, Midoriya returned from his training. The eerie silence that accompanied him was unsettling, his demeanor calm yet unnervingly cold. His appearance had reverted to normal, but his aura told a different story. His jet-black hair fell over his forehead, while his eyes black scara with chilling white pupils exuded a terrifying, emotionless intensity. Midoriya stepped into the room where Kurogyri, Nagant, and All Might to Do were waiting. His voice was steady, leaving no room for argument as he addressed Garaki, the scientist. He demanded Selene's location, stating it was time to recruit her. Garaki, hands trembling slightly as he typed into a console, nodded in compliance. He assured Midoriya that the coordinates would be sent to Kurogyri shortly. Midoriya then turned to Kurogyri, his unsettling gaze locking onto him. He instructed that when the location arrived, he should teleport him there immediately and ensure that Nagant and To-Do were treated well during his absence. Nagant, leaning casually against the wall, smirked slightly, noting his generous mood. To-Do, with his usual boisterous energy, added that he would appreciate some good food while Midoriya was out, laughing lightly. Midoriya did not respond to their comments. Instead, he turned back to Kurogyri, whose portal began to swirl as the location data arrived. Without hesitation, Midoriya stepped forward, his boots echoing ominously against the floor. He stated he wouldn't be long before stepping into the portal. Though his chainsaw-enhanced form was not visible, the memory of it lingered in everyone's mind, a reminder of the terrifying power he now wielded. The portal swirled violently as Midoriya stepped through, arriving at a desolate port under the cover of night. The salty air carried the faint sound of waves crashing against the dock. Before him stood Selene, her piercing blue eyes glowing in the dark, surrounded by her loyal followers. Each radiated an intimidating presence, their stances exuding confidence and power. Selene herself stood with an air of regal dominance, her black leather suit glinting faintly under the moonlight. Midoriya's cold gaze settled on her as he began to make his offer. He was forming a group of 10 commanders with unmatched strength. Together, they would dismantle the broken society and rebuild it. He wanted her to be part of it. Selene raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into a smirk as she questioned what would happen if she refused. Midoriya's expression remained unchanged as he coldly replied that he would find other ways to make her work for him. Her answer would determine whether the process would be easy or not. Selene's smirk widened into a cold grin. She didn't take kindly to threats and motioned to her followers, signaling them to advance. They rushed forward, each unleashing their full strength. However, Midoriya remained still, his body taut and unwavering. As they attacked, he moved with calculated precision, dismantling each opponent with remarkable efficiency. His punches landed with such force that they sent opponents sprawling, and his movements were so sharp that even the most seasoned fighters struggled to keep up. He didn't rely on his quirks. His body, honed to perfection, delivered devastation with every strike. The port soon became a scene of chaos, filled with the sounds of those who had fallen. Selene observed, her smirk fading into a more serious expression. She acknowledged his skill with a quiet remark about his training. Midoriya stepped forward, his boots crunching against the debris. He issued a cold ultimatum, urging her to join him or face the consequences. Celine responded with a dark chuckle, her demeanor shifting as she acknowledged his power. To spread her arms, transforming into her vampire form. Her eyes glowed an ominous red, and her presence became overwhelming, radiating strength and speed. Midoriya stood firm, reaching for the tool quirk he had absorbed. His body shifted, transforming into his Chainsaw Man form, the sound of chainsaws roaring through the air. His eyes glowed with an otherworldly intensity, and he exuded raw power. He declared that he wouldn't hold back, and the two figures faced off, their power clashing in the port like a brewing storm. The battle for dominance had begun. The night erupted into chaos as Celine and Midoriya clashed in a battle that shook the very foundations of the port. Celine, in her vampiric form, moved with incredible speed, her claws slicing through the air with deadly precision. She darted around Midoriya like a blur, striking him from every angle, her enhanced strength tearing through concrete and steel as if they were paper. Midoriya, now fully transformed into his Chainsaw Man form, was a storm of destruction. His chainsaws roared, shredding through everything in his path: buildings, cargo containers, even the ground beneath them. Celine launched herself into the air, her claws aimed at Midoriya's chest. He intercepted her mid-air, swinging his chainsaw arm upward with a deafening roar. The clash sent shockwaves rippling through the port, shattering nearby windows and causing weakened structures to tremble. Midoriya acknowledged her strength, growling that she was strong but not unstoppable. Celine hissed, her glowing red eyes narrowing as she landed gracefully on a pile of rubble. She leaped forward again, this time faster, using the darkness to her advantage. Midoriya turned, his chainsaw ripping through the air in a wide arc, barely missing her as she ducked and slashed at his side, sparks flying from his hardened body. The battle raged on, both combatants relentless. Midoriya's chainsaws tore through everything Celine threw at him, while her vampiric agility allowed her to dodge his wild swings and land calculated strikes. Buildings crumbled around them, debris and dust filling the air as their battle escalated into a display of raw power. Finally, Celine made a critical mistake. She lunged at Midoriya in an all-out assault, aiming to overwhelm him. But Midoriya anticipated her move. With a fierce growl, he drove his chainsaw arm upward, slashing across her chest and sending her flying backward into a crumbling wall. Celine crashed to the ground, struggling to stand, her breaths ragged, her once dominant aura now flickering. Midoriya approached her slowly, his chainsaw arms still roaring. His black scara and white pupils burned with cold determination. He declared that it was enough, stating she had lost. While her strength was undeniable, it was not enough to defeat him. Celine coughed, her gaze defiant even in defeat. She questioned whether he thought this made him superior, her voice laced with pain and bitterness. Midoriya knelt before her, the chainsaws on his arms retracting as his form returned to normal. His cold, emotionless expression remained unchanged as he expressed that he did not care about superiority but rather results. He offered her a choice to join him as his commander, suggesting that together they could tear apart the rotten society and create something better. He added, leaning closer, that if she refused he would find someone else who could. Celine stared at him, her pride clashing with the reality of her injuries. After a long moment, she let out a bitter chuckle, admitting that he was as relentless as he was powerful. She agreed to join him but made it clear that she would not bow to him. The lively chatter of the Class 2A girls filled the air as they wandered through the crowded mall. Bags swung from their arms as they joked and laughed, the excitement of their shopping spree lighting up their faces. Fu Azui, among them, had a small, relaxed smile as she examined a shop window. Suddenly, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw her mother's number on the screen. Answering in her usual calm tone, she acknowledged her mother's urgent request for help at home. Tsiu frowned slightly but nodded, agreeing to head back soon. She turned to the group, informing them that she had to go help her mom with something. Her friends waved her off, unaware of the sinister events unfolding behind the scenes. Elsewhere, Midoriya leaned back in his chair, his black scara and white pupils glowing faintly in the dim room. A voice modulator sat on the desk before him, still active. A cold smirk tugged at his lips as he rested his chin on his hand. He noted that the pieces were moving and it was time to see how loyal people really were when their lives were at stake. Behind him, Celine, Deku, and Nagant stood, waiting for his orders. Midoriya's gaze flicked toward them. He instructed Deku to handle Tsuyu's father, emphasizing the need for discretion and to blend in. Deku nodded firmly, preparing to leave. Midoriya then turned to Nagant, assigning her the task of dealing with Tsuyu's mother under the same conditions. Nagant smirked faintly, her instincts kicking in as she acknowledged the order. Finally, Midoriya focused on Celine, giving her the responsibility of targeting Tsuyu's siblings. He expected her to handle them efficiently, blending in and using her charms without raising suspicion. Celine responded with a sly smile, assuring him that it would be done. Midoriya leaned forward, clasping his hands as he reminded them all to make their actions seamless. This was more than just sending a message, it was about control. He instructed them to act like normal people until the moment came, and they nodded in unison, heading out to fulfill their missions. Deku adjusted his hat, ensuring it shadowed most of his face. His plain clothes and slouched posture gave him the perfect guise of an ordinary man. Holding a crumpled map in his hand, he wandered near Tsuyu Ajui's family home. The air was quiet, save for the occasional chirping of birds. His sharp eyes scanned the area until they landed on Tsuyu's father, who was tending to the garden outside the house. Drawing a deep breath, Deku put on an embarrassed, friendly smile and approached, asking for help with directions. Tsuyu's father looked up, wiping his hands on his apron, and offered to assist him with the map. Deku handed it over, watching closely as the man studied it, and they engaged in a conversation about the area, with Tsuyu's father kindly offering to show him the way. It's not too far from here. Deku widened his eyes, feigning relief, and expressed his gratitude to the man. The two walked side by side, with Deku carefully steering the conversation to seem harmless. He glanced at the man and inquired about his residence, noting the peacefulness of the neighborhood. Tsuyu's father nodded, sharing that his family had lived there for years and that it was a good place for children to grow up. Deku smiled faintly, acknowledging the importance of family. Tsuyu's father spoke proudly about his dedication to providing for his children, which made Deku tighten his grip on the map slightly while maintaining a warm expression. He complimented the man, who then asked about Teddu's family. Deku hesitated for a moment before admitting he had been on his own for a while, attributing his poor sense of direction to that. Tsuyu's father reassured him, encouraging him to keep moving forward. Deku smirked inwardly at the irony of those words. As they neared an alley close to their destination, Deku slowed his pace, pretending to check the map again. He asked if this was the place, tilting the map for Tsuyu's father to see. The man leaned in, pointing to the spot on the map, but Teddu's movements became sudden and precise. He grabbed Tsuyu's father by the arm, twisting it behind his back in one fluid motion. The older man cried out, but Deku quickly covered his mouth. He whispered coldly, his earlier nervous demeanor vanishing, that they wouldn't want to cause a scene. Tsuyu's father struggled, but Teddu's strength was overwhelming as he dragged the man deeper into the alley, away from prying eyes. The man gasped, questioning Teddu's actions once he removed his hand. Deku leaned in close, his eyes sharp and unforgiving, explaining that someone important had plans for him and that he shouldn't take it personally. Tsuyu's father's eyes widened in terror, but before he could scream, Deku delivered a swift blow to the back of his head, rendering him unconscious. Deku straightened, pulling out a small communication device and reporting that the target was secured. Midoriya's calm and cold voice came through, instructing him to bring the man to the rendezvous point while ensuring no one saw him. Deku nodded to himself, hoisting the unconscious man over his shoulder and making his way to the extraction point, reflecting on how easily the man had trusted him, leading to his downfall. Meanwhile, a television flickered with a grim report, the anchor's voice heavy with the weight of the news. A body had been discovered in a fish storage facility near the port, with signs of brutal torture evident. Authorities were investigating the scene. Class 2A sat in the common room, their faces pale as they watched the broadcast. Uraraka gasped, her hands flying to her mouth, recognizing Tsuyu's clothes. Kirishima clenched his fists, unable to believe what he was seeing. Aizawa entered the room, his expression grim but composed, having already connected the dots. He attempted to reach Tsuyu's parents but was met with silence. Firmly, Aizawa stated that they needed answers and decided to accompany the police to her house, instructing the students to stay alert and not go anywhere alone. The students nodded reluctantly, the atmosphere heavy with fear and sorrow. At Tsuyu's family home, Aizawa and the police found the house eerily quiet, the air thick with an unsettling stillness. After knocking several times with no response, the officers entered cautiously. The house was empty, with no signs of struggle, but the absence of the family was glaring. Aizawa's stomach churned, sensing that something was very wrong. In a dimly lit room, Midoriya leaned back in a chair, his cold eyes fixated on the news report. His unsettling smile never wavered as he murmured with satisfaction. Turning to a nearby monitor, he inquired about the readiness of the nomus he had requested. A distorted voice replied that they were almost ready, needing just a bit more fine-tuning. Midoriya's smile widened, expressing his anticipation for their deployment. He leaned forward, fingers steepled under his chin, watching the chaos unfold with a chilling sense of satisfaction. In a sterile environment heavy with the faint hum of machinery, four massive chambers lined one wall, each filled with a viscous green fluid. Inside, the transformed bodies of Tsuyu's family had been grotesquely altered into nomus. Midoriya observed them with a detached, calculating expression, his fingers lightly tapping the edge of a console. The first nomu, resembling Tsuyu's father, towered nearly 8 feet tall, its bulky frame covered in patches of black, amphibian-like skin. Its elongated arms ended in webbed claws capable of slicing through steel. Its face was a grotesque mimicry of Tsuyu's father, with wide, vacant eyes and a jaw that could unhinge to unleash a devastating sonic screech. Tiny suction cups lined its forearms, allowing it to scale any surface with ease. The second nomu, resembling Tsuyu's mother, had a lean, sinewy build, its body covered in scales that shimmered with an eerie green hue. Long, serpentine limbs twisted unnaturally as it floated within the chamber, its face warped with sharp, protruding teeth and glowing red eyes. A long, whip-like tongue extended from its mouth, tipped with a stinger capable of paralyzing its victims. Quartz. Venom sting. The tongue's stinger delivers a toxin that can incapacitate targets instantly. Elasticity. Limbs and tongue can stretch to incredible lengths for ranged attacks. Camouflage. Can blend seamlessly into its surroundings, making it nearly invisible. Nomu 3, Tsuyu's sister. This smaller Nomu retained the petite frame of Tsuyu's younger sister, but its appearance was far from innocent. Its body was grotesquely emaciated, with sharp, bony protrusions jutting out from its limbs. Its mouth stretched unnaturally wide, filled with razor-sharp teeth, and its frog-like eyes glowed an ominous yellow. Long, clawed fingers twitched menacingly, hinting at its predatory nature. Quartz. Acid spit. Generates a highly corrosive liquid that can melt through most materials. Regeneration. Rapidly heals from injuries, making it difficult to incapacitate. Enhanced agility. Moves with incredible speed and precision, making it a lethal close-range fighter. Nomu 4, Tsuyu's brother. The youngest of the family had been transformed into a horrifyingly spider-like creature. Multiple limbs sprouted from its back, each ending in sharp, blade-like appendages. Its face was barely recognizable, with hollow eye sockets that glowed faintly blue and a twisted grin that stretched far beyond human limits. Its torso pulsed with an eerie blue light, a sign of the powerful energy it contained. Quartz. Energy blast. Fires concentrated energy beams from its chest, capable of piercing through reinforced steel. Web creation. Produces incredibly strong and sticky webs to trap opponents. Bladed limbs. Extra appendages are razor-sharp and capable of slicing through most defenses. Midoriya studied the nomus with a cold smirk, his eyes flickering between each chamber. He thought about how each one would become a weapon to dismantle society. Heroes would be powerless against the horrors they would soon face. As for Tsuyu, he considered this the ultimate punishment. Her family would not rest in peace, they would become instruments of destruction. He turned his gaze to Garaki, who stood hunched over a console, making final adjustments to the machinery. The dim light of the laboratory cast eerie shadows over Garaki's face, highlighting his unnerving grin as he worked. Midoriya's voice cut through the room, sharp and commanding. He asked Garaki if the Nomus were ready, expressing his desire for no delays. Garaki turned slowly, a mixture of pride and madness in his expression. He assured Midoriya that they were more than ready, each one fine-tuned to perfection, their quirks fully integrated, and their bodies optimized for destruction. Just give the word, and they would be unleashed upon the world. Midoriya stepped closer to the chambers, scanning each twisted creation with clinical detachment. He acknowledged that these Nomus would mark the beginning of a new chapter, his chapter. Society would crumble under the weight of its sins, starting with these monsters. Garaki chuckled darkly, praising Midoriya for turning their family into weapons, calling it poetic, a fitting punishment for their betrayal. Midoriya's smirk grew as he placed a hand on the glass of one of the chambers. The Nomu inside twitched slightly, as though responding to his presence. He corrected Garaki, stating that this was not poetry but justice, the kind of justice this broken world deserved. He ordered Garaki to prepare for their release, signaling that the next phase of his plan would begin that night. Garaki nodded, his fingers flying over the keyboard, assuring Midoriya that they would be ready for deployment within the hour. Midoriya turned away, the faint glow of the chambers casting an ominous light on his retreating figure. He instructed Garaki to ensure nothing went wrong, emphasizing that failure was not an option. As he walked away, his voice echoed through the room, cold and final, reminding Garaki to make sure the world knew exactly who was responsible when chaos began. Midoriya stood in the dimly lit laboratory, his gaze fixed on the four Nomus as they emerged from their chambers. The grotesque figures moved with unnerving precision, their monstrous forms a testament to Garaki's twisted genius. Each of them loomed in the shadows, awaiting commands like predators ready to strike. He ordered Garaki to teleport them to the specified locations, eager for the world to witness the beginning of its end. Garaki cackled as he activated the teleportation system, declaring that it was time for the Nomus to become the heralds of Midoriya's new order. Society would not know what hit them. The Nomus were enveloped in shimmering portals, their monstrous forms disappearing one by one. In the heart of the bustling city, the first Nomu materialized, a hulking, armored brute with Tsuyu's father's features grotesquely distorted. Its quirk sent massive tremors through the ground with every step, causing buildings to crumble and cars to flip as chaos erupted. It raised a massive fist, slamming it into the pavement and sending shockwaves through the city. Dust and debris filled the air as terrified citizens fled in every direction. In a lively shopping area, the second Nomu appeared, a sleek, insectoid creature with multiple limbs and sharp claws, twisted remnants of Tsuyu's mother's body. Its quirk allowed it to shoot corrosive webs that melted through steel and concrete. The Nomu crawled along the sides of buildings, spewing its acidic substance, which dripped down and destroyed everything it touched. Shoppers and workers scrambled to escape as entire storefronts dissolved into puddles of corrosive goo. In a quiet suburban neighborhood, the third Nomu, a wiry, grotesque figure resembling Tsuyu's younger sister, emerged. Its quirk unleashed deafening sound waves that shattered windows and ruptured eardrums. The peaceful neighborhood turned into chaos as people ran, clutching their ears, their cries drowned out by the Nomu's piercing wail. Houses collapsed under the force of the sound waves, and the air was filled with the sound of destruction. To say whatever happened at UA High School 2 hours ago was a disaster would be the understatement of the century. Police tape cordoned off the area, 4 patrol cars were parked haphazardly, and 2 ambulances were present, one carrying a body under a tarp. CSI officers meticulously examined the scene, their equipment scattered around a crate near the school's entrance. The media swarmed outside, broadcasting the chaos and undoubtedly preparing lawsuits that would haunt UA for years. Amidst the chaos, a covered body was carefully placed in another ambulance, a chilling discovery that demanded answers. Detective Nao Mesa Tsukachi stood in the school's conference room, reviewing the security footage alongside Principal Nizu and the teaching staff. The mood was grim, the air heavy with shock and anger. Class 1A's students, still reeling from the loss of their classmate, were being questioned one by one. Tsukachi's assistant, Officer Sansa, entered the room briskly, holding a sealed brown envelope in his hands. He informed Tsukachi that someone had just delivered it. The detective frowned, asking who the sender was. Adzuki Miryu was a name that didn't resonate with Tsukachi. He took the envelope, noting its unusual weight. Upon opening it, he found a cell phone. Before he could examine it further, the phone buzzed, revealing an incoming call from a blocked number. Without hesitation, Tsukachi answered. A calm yet chilling voice greeted him, asking how America was and if he enjoyed the change of scenery. Tsukachi tightened his grip on the phone, demanding to know who was speaking. The voice responded with a chuckle, revealing itself as Adzuki Miryu and suggesting that Tsukachi rearrange the letters of the name to uncover the truth. Confused yet cautious, Tsukachi grabbed a pen and paper, rearranging the letters in his mind until one name emerged, sending a shiver down his spine. Izuku Midoriya. The atmosphere in the room shifted, with Principal Nizu and Aizawa showing signs of shock. The voice continued, congratulating Tsukachi on his deduction and implying that he had expected nothing less. Tsukachi's voice turned firm as he confronted the voice about the murder of Tsuyu Azui and her family. A brief silence followed before the voice confirmed the accusation, the weight of those words hitting Tsukachi hard. Tsukachi asked why this had happened, to which Izuku replied that Class 1A should be asked that question. He gave Tsukachi 1 hour to uncover the truth about his incarceration, threatening to reveal everything himself if he failed. The call ended abruptly, leaving Tsukachi's mind racing with the implications. Turning to Sansa, Tsukachi instructed him to gather every student from Class 1A in the meeting room immediately. 10 minutes later, Class 1A sat in the meeting room, their faces pale and eyes red from tears. The atmosphere was thick with fear and confusion as Tsukachi stood at the front, flanked by Principal Nizu and Aizawa. He addressed the students, acknowledging their distress but emphasizing the urgency of the situation. He asked them to recount the last time they saw Tsuyu. Achiko Uraraka, her voice shaky, recalled that they had been planning a trip to the mall when Tsuyu received an urgent call from her mother and left in a hurry. Tsukachi nodded and inquired about Izuku Midoriya, noting the tension that filled the room at the mention of his name. Eijiro Kirishima frowned, questioning what Midoriya had to do with the situation. Tsukachi pressed on, asking if the class had accused Midoriya of being the UA traitor 7 months prior. Katsuki Bakugo confirmed the accusation, stating that Midoriya had always seemed suspicious with his mutterings and strange notes. When Tsukachi asked if they had ever looked at the contents of those notebooks, Bakugo admitted they had seen them as children, filled with odd hero analysis. Tsukachi questioned whether Midoriya had a criminal record or any known contact with villains, to which the students replied negatively. He then asked how they had concluded that he was a traitor, leading to a heavy silence as the students avoided eye contact, guilt evident on their faces. Tsukachi revealed that his quirk was a lie detector and that not a single word they had spoken about Midoriya had been truthful. He accused them of lying to their teachers, pro-heroes, and to him, demanding to know why. Bakugo's face turned pale as Tsukachi accused them of framing Midoriya out of jealousy or fear, highlighting the destruction they had caused in his life. The room fell silent as Tsukachi dialed Izuku's number. When Izuku answered, his tone was calm, almost mocking. Tsukachi grimly confirmed that his classmates had framed him. Izuku requested to be put on speaker, and Tsukachi complied. Izuku addressed Bakugo venomously, asking how it felt to know their actions had consequences. Bakugo gritted his teeth but remained silent. Izuku continued, asserting that they were all cowards for destroying him out of their inability to accept his potential. Tsukachi interjected, urging Izuku to return to UA for a fair trial, to which Izuku responded with bitter laughter, doubting the fairness of the system. He offered Tsukachi one chance to fix the situation, warning that their next conversation would not be merely words. Aizawa then stood before his students, his voice low but sharp, expressing his disappointment and frustration. He declared that if it were up to him, he would have expelled them all for their actions, emphasizing that they did not deserve to be called heroes in training. The weight of Aizawa's words hung heavily in the air, and the students could not meet his gaze, shame and guilt washing over them. Aizawa pointed out that they had manipulated the situation, twisted the facts, and convinced themselves their lies were justified, costing not just a classmate's trust but his entire future. Present Mike, standing nearby, echoed Aizawa's sentiments, stating that they were fortunate not to have been expelled already. Uraraka attempted to defend their actions, claiming they thought they were doing the right thing, but Aizawa cut her off, demanding to know what evidence they had based their assumptions on. Kirishima protested, insisting they only wanted to protect everyone, but Aizawa stepped closer, icy in his tone. He accused them of endangering everyone, pushing someone already struggling over the edge, and warned them that if they thought this was anyone's fault but their own, they were deluding themselves. Bakugo, who had remained silent, finally snapped, unable to contain his frustration any longer. Aizawa moved swiftly, delivering a sharp slap to Bakugo's head, causing the room to gasp in unison. The explosion user turned, stunned and holding his head. Aizawa's voice was dangerously low as he addressed the group, stating that they had no right to speak after their actions. He declared that they were not heroes, but rather cowards who had chosen an easy target and caused harm for their convenience. The mention of Tsuyu Ajui's fate hung heavily in the air. Aizawa's voice cracked as he continued, emphasizing the weight of their responsibility for the consequences of their actions. He made it clear that the blood of Tsuyu and her family was now on their hands, and that any harm Midoriya caused in the future would be their burden to bear. Principal Nizu, standing beside Aizawa, cleared his throat to announce the punishment. The students would face 3 months of nightly detention, scrubbing the entire school and dorms. Once that was completed, they would no longer be part of Class 1A and would have to find another instructor or transfer to another school. They had lost the privilege of being taught by Aizawa. Kaminari's shocked expression reflected the disbelief in the room. Nizu explained that the only reason they were not being expelled immediately was that if they left and Midoriya targeted them, the blame would fall on the school. However, once the crisis was resolved, they would no longer be students. As the staff left, the students remained in stunned silence. In the teacher's lounge, Aizawa slumped against the wall, burying his face in his hands. A quiet sob escaped him, the weight of his guilt threatening to overwhelm him. He felt he had failed as a teacher, protector, and believer in his students. He whispered to himself, acknowledging his mistake. The door creaked open, and Namuri entered, arms crossed. She confronted Aizawa, reminding him that he had ignored her warnings and that a student's life was now in ruins because of it. Aizawa admitted his failure, but Namuri insisted that he needed to confront the reality of the situation. In the meeting room, Nizu presented a file to the staff and Detective Tsukachi. The file contained information about Midoriya, including his time at UA and a note that had gone unnoticed until now. Tsukachi raised an eyebrow, prompting Nizu to reveal that Midoriya had attended the same middle school as Bakugo. Upon investigation, it was discovered that his school records had been fabricated, revealing extensive bullying, both physical and emotional. The room fell silent as the gravity of Nizu's words sank in. Aizawa's shoulders sagged as he absorbed the information. Nizu expressed regret for allowing this to happen, acknowledging that they had trusted incomplete records and ignored warning signs. Tsukachi grimly noted that they had let a child fall through the cracks, and now they had to face the consequences. The meeting continued, but the weight of guilt hung heavily over everyone present. Present Mike expressed skepticism about bringing Midoriya back, questioning whether he would even want to return or if he would view them as enemies. Aizawa's jaw tightened as he insisted they could not give up on him yet. Nizu signaled the end of the meeting, urging everyone to reflect on their roles in the situation to avoid repeating past mistakes. Tsukachi received a call from his subordinates and listened intently. The expression on his face shifted to one of dread, prompting concern from the others. After ending the call, he informed them that Midoriya had made enemies while in Tartarus. The revelation that Midoriya had been involved in multiple fights with other inmates, resulting in injuries, shocked the staff. Tsukachi explained that someone had eventually stood up for Midoriya, leading to a shift in his situation. Curiosity piqued, Snipe asked about the identity of this mysterious savior. Tsukachi revealed that they were familiar with the individual, as their cells were adjacent. The name, Kaizome Akaguro, also known as the hero killer Stain, sent a wave of unease through the room. Cementos broke the silence, acknowledging the implications of Midoriya having spent months under Stain's influence. The teacher's discomfort grew as they considered what Stain could have taught him. Nizu mused about Stain's skills and ideology, recognizing that if Midoriya had trained under him, they might be facing a far more dangerous individual than they had anticipated. Midnight expressed her concern about the involvement of the Yamazaki clan, the notorious underground crime syndicate, and the implications of their interest in Midoriya. Tsukachi confirmed that the clan head had taken an interest in Midoriya due to his impressive resilience and fighting spirit, which had not gone unnoticed during his time in Tartarus. They even referred to him as a diamond forged under pressure. Vlad King expressed his frustration as he questioned what the Yamazaki clan wanted with Midoriya. Tsukachi found it difficult to say, but he speculated that given their history, they might view him as an asset, a tool to wield against their enemies or even society itself. Aizawa, rubbing his temples, muttered sarcastically about how they had not only pushed Midoriya into the hands of Stain but potentially into the grasp of one of the most dangerous criminal organizations in the country. Nizu interjected calmly yet firmly, stating that this was more than a failure on their part. They had not only failed Midoriya as educators and heroes, but they had also created a potential threat to society by misjudging and mistreating him. Power Loader, confused, questioned why Midoriya would even consider aligning with the Yamazakis, as he didn't seem like the type to willingly join a criminal syndicate. Namuri softly pointed out that desperation and anger could drive him to such choices. They had taken everything from him: his dreams, his reputation, and his mother. With nothing left to lose, he had become dangerous. Aizawa darkly noted that if Stain had influenced Midoriya's mindset during their time together, he might already be seeing the flaws in hero society through Stain's perspective. Snipe gravely added that Midoriya didn't need a quirk to be a threat. He had already demonstrated his analytical mind, adaptability, and combat skills. If he combined those with Stain's ideology and the resources of the Yamazaki clan, they would be in serious trouble. The room was thick with tension as the gravity of the situation settled over the group. Nizu finally stated that they needed a plan not just to find Midoriya but to understand how to approach him. If they charged in recklessly, they risked pushing him further into darkness. Mike raised a concern about the Yamazakis, questioning if they would protect him. Tsukachi cautioned that if Midoriya was aligning with them, any misstep could solidify his loyalty to them. Vlad King asked if they thought Midoriya had already been fully corrupted by Stain and the Yamazakis. Aizawa firmly replied that Midoriya was not lost yet. He was angry, betrayed, and grieving, but there was still a chance to reach him. They just needed to find the right way to approach him. Namuri voiced the question that lingered in the air: what if they couldn't reach him? Aizawa's eyes darkened as he acknowledged that they would have to face the consequences of their mistakes head-on. The room fell silent again, the weight of Aizawa's words heavy. Everyone understood that finding Izuku and bringing him back would not only require skill and strategy but also the daunting task of undoing years of damage caused by their negligence. Even then, there were no guarantees. Meanwhile, Midoriya stood in a dimly lit warehouse, dressed in a sharp black shirt and tailored pants that exuded authority. Across from him was Ivan, the son of the Russian underworld Don and the fourth commander of the syndicate. Beside Ivan stood his mercenary, a former soldier turned arms dealer. The air was tense yet calm as the mercenary placed a briefcase on the table and opened it, revealing a sniper rifle of exceptional craftsmanship. Ivan leaned slightly forward, smirking as he informed Midoriya that he had what he asked for. Midoriya scanned the weapon and nodded in approval. Without breaking eye contact, he took out his phone and called someone, calmly stating that Nagin's early Christmas present was ready: a one-of-a-kind sniper. The mercenary sneered, surprised that someone like Midoriya knew about guns. Midoriya's piercing gaze shifted to the man, and he warned him to watch his mouth in fluent Russian, causing Ivan's men to freeze, exchanging nervous glances. As the briefcase was passed to Midoriya, he inspected the sniper with precision. Handing it back to Nagant, he introduced Ivan, emphasizing that his name carried weight. Nagant accepted the sniper with a slight smile, appreciating the gift. The mercenary, emboldened by her presence, made an inappropriate comment and reached toward her. Before he could get far, Nagant swiftly twisted his arm and slammed him into the table, coldly warning him not to touch her again. As the mercenary backed off, humiliated, Midoriya sighed and began unbuttoning his shirt, handing it to Nagant to hold. She blushed slightly, her sharp demeanor faltering as her eyes lingered on his physique. Hidden in the shadows, Celine quietly recorded everything on her phone, her admiration for Midoriya growing as she muttered to herself about his perfection and strength. Midoriya approached the mercenary, his steps slow and deliberate. The room fell silent, and Ivan watched with a mix of respect and fear. Midoriya flatly stated that the mercenary had his chance but didn't seem to understand who he was dealing with. The mercenary barely had time to react before Midoriya's fist shot forward with incredible speed. The impact was devastating, and the mercenary fell to the floor, defeated. Nagant stared in shock, clutching the sniper and shirt tighter, murmuring about the power of a single punch. Ivan stepped back, visibly shaken, as Midoriya turned his cold gaze toward him, delivering a lesson about keeping his men in check. Midoriya slipped the shirt back on effortlessly and adjusted his collar, telling Nagant that their business was done. As they exited, Celine, still hidden, whispered to herself about her unwavering devotion to Midoriya. As the heavy silence settled over the room, Ivan reached for his phone with trembling hands. He dialed a number, his fingers shaking slightly as he placed the call. The line connected after a few rings, and a deep, commanding voice came from the other end: his father, the Russian underworld Don. Ivan hesitated before informing his father about the mercenary's fate, his voice low and hesitant, laced with fear. The Don's irritation was palpable as he demanded to know what had happened. Ivan took a deep breath, explaining that it was Midoriya who had dealt the blow, describing the mercenary's fate in a shaky voice. The Don remained silent for a moment, processing the information. With one punch, Ivan's voice was filled with disbelief as he confirmed what he had seen. He had witnessed something extraordinary. Midoriya was more intimidating than all for one himself. He had acted without hesitation, ending a life as if it were nothing. The Don's tone shifted to one of caution as he advised Ivan to avoid provoking Midoriya. He emphasized the importance of keeping their dealings respectful, warning that men like Midoriya were not to be crossed. Ivan nodded in agreement, acknowledging his father's warning and vowing not to underestimate Midoriya again. After the call ended, Ivan lowered the phone, his hands still trembling. He took one last look at the aftermath of Midoriya's display of power, his mind racing with the realization that Midoriya was not just a man but a formidable force. As Ivan stood there, his phone buzzed again. It was a call from one of his trusted men who had witnessed the events unfold. The man expressed concern about the mercenary's actions, which had led to his demise. Ivan felt irritation rise within him as he responded, acknowledging the mercenary's foolishness in trying to confront Midoriya's subordinate. The man on the line hesitated, admitting that they had underestimated Midoriya's response. He described how Midoriya had not just defeated the mercenary but had completely obliterated him with a single blow. Ivan clenched his jaw, frustrated that his men still did not grasp the gravity of the situation. He reminded them that Midoriya was not a small-time thug but a force to be reckoned with. The man on the line noted that Midoriya was even more dangerous than Ivan or his father. Ivan let out a dry laugh, fully aware of Midoriya's reputation. He issued a stern warning to his men, making it clear that anyone who crossed Midoriya would be left to fend for themselves. After ending the call, Ivan took one last look at the scene, muttering to himself about the nightmare that was Midoriya. Meanwhile, Midoriya turned to Nagant, casually asking for his shirt back. She, still flustered by his display of power, handed it to him without meeting his gaze. Midoriya slipped on his shirt and prepared to handle some business. Curiosity sparked in Nagant as she asked where he was going. Midoriya revealed his plan to buy a news company that was in debt to his father. He explained that he wanted to take it off the owner's hands before it completely failed. Nagant was surprised by the ease with which he approached such a significant transaction. Just then, Chad arrived, impeccably dressed as Midoriya's bodyguard. As they discussed the implications of Midoriya's actions, Nagant expressed concern about the visibility of his dealings. Midoriya reassured her that he had taken precautions to remain undetected. As they spoke, a luxurious black car pulled up, and Chad opened the door for Midoriya. He stepped inside, and Chad took the driver's seat. Nagant watched them leave, reflecting on the scale of Midoriya's operations. In another part of the city, Aoi Tadu stood before a crowd of individuals who had been overlooked by society. He had been tasked by Midoriya to find those who were quirkless or had quirks deemed useless. Now, these individuals stood before him, uncertain yet hopeful. Tadu's commanding presence demanded their attention as he announced the opportunity for jobs with good pay and decent hours. He instructed his team to bring in hairstylists and makeup artists to prepare the group for their new roles in the media. He emphasized the importance of first impressions and outlined the skills they would need to learn. Many individuals in the room possessed talent, yet they had been overlooked, denied opportunities by society. Tadu conveyed his boss's belief in them, sharing that his boss understood their struggles and had once faced similar challenges. Now, he was offering them a chance to change their lives. Tadu's tone softened as he observed the hopeful expressions around him. He urged them not to squander this opportunity, emphasizing that they had 1 week to prepare for interviews and should utilize the resources available to them. This was a rare chance, and his boss was not one to offer such opportunities lightly. He was a good man who genuinely believed in their potential. The group exchanged determined glances, their initial skepticism replaced by hope. They nodded in agreement, ready to embrace the chance they had been given. Tadu clapped his hands, startling some of the attendees. He encouraged everyone to get to work, instructing the stylists to begin their preparations while the others gathered their documents to study. Interviews were just around the corner, and he expected everyone to be ready. As Tadu watched them disperse, a smirk crossed his face. He admired Midoriya's vision, believing that this news channel would be more than just a business, it would change lives. Inside a sleek luxury car, Midoriya leaned back in his seat, his sharp eyes scanning documents on his tablet. Chad, seated in the passenger seat, occasionally glanced back to ensure everything was secure. The gentle hum of the engine provided a calming backdrop to their journey. Midoriya's phone buzzed, and he answered with a calm demeanor. Tadu's enthusiastic voice came through, reporting that everything was going smoothly. He had gathered a diverse group of individuals, including those without quirks and those whose quirks had been dismissed by society. Tadu had even arranged for hairstylists and makeup artists to help them make a strong first impression. Midoriya chuckled softly, pleased with Tadu's progress. He inquired about the skills training materials, and Tadu confirmed that he had distributed everything and informed the group about the upcoming interviews. Tadu could see the potential in their eyes. They just needed someone to believe in them. Midoriya's expression softened as he reflected on his own experiences. He understood the judgment they faced for circumstances beyond their control. He was determined to provide them with the chance they deserved if they were willing to work hard. Tadu's tone shifted to one of admiration as he acknowledged Midoriya's dedication. He remarked on how few would go to such lengths for people they didn't know. Midoriya gazed out the window, contemplating the cityscape. He emphasized that it wasn't about knowing them but about creating something better. This news channel would serve as a voice for those who had been ignored, and he wanted Tadu to ensure that everyone understood this mission. Tadu's enthusiasm returned as he assured Midoriya that he would make them proud and personally oversee their preparations. Midoriya expressed his gratitude before ending the call. He glanced at Chad, noting that everything was on track. He wanted to make the meeting quick so he could see the progress in person after finalizing the deal for the company. Chad opened the door for Midoriya as they arrived at their destination. Midoriya stepped out, his boots clicking on the pavement as he surveyed the area. The news station stood before him, its name, always all around, prominently displayed. However, the building lacked the vibrant energy it once had, appearing empty and devoid of purpose. A slight smirk appeared on Midoriya's lips as an idea began to form. He knew that revitalizing this place required more than just a fresh start. It needed a vision. He pulled out his phone and called the quirk specialist who had assisted him with previous construction projects. After a few rings, a crisp, professional voice answered. Midoriya outlined his request for 3 spacious, comfortable buildings to serve as high-quality apartments for his employees, offering to double the pay if they could complete the project in 1 week. The specialist expressed excitement at the ambitious timeline and assured Midoriya they could make it work, provided they had full access to the land and necessary materials. Midoriya confirmed that he would grant full authority for the project, emphasizing the importance of luxury and comfort in the apartments. After ending the call, Midoriya's gaze returned to the quiet news station. Soon, it would become a new home for those seeking opportunities, a place where they could rise together. Turning to Chad, who had been observing, Midoriya declared that they would transform the station into something greater. The people deserved not just jobs but homes and a fulfilling life. Chad agreed, recognizing the significance of this endeavor. With determination, Midoriya approached the building, ready to take the first steps toward his vision. The clock was ticking, but he was confident they would succeed. As the call concluded, workers began mobilizing. Trucks arrived with materials, and construction quirks were put to immediate use. The sounds of progress filled the air as the once desolate area began to transform. Satisfied with the rapid developments, Midoriya focused on the station itself. He had grand plans for rebranding it and quickly called the design team. He instructed them to change the name and logo, signaling that this station would no longer be what it once was. It was going to represent something bigger, an empire of truth and opportunity. As he stood amidst the bustling construction site, Midoriya could already envision the finished buildings and the new life they would bring. For him, this wasn't just about business, it was about creating a foundation for people who had been overlooked, much like he once had been. It had been a week since Midoriya took over the news station. The once abandoned, lifeless building had transformed into a vibrant workspace, with the newly constructed apartments nearby ready to house his employees. The name of the station had been changed to Truth Beacon News, reflecting his vision of honest journalism. As he walked into the spacious meeting room, dressed in his sharp black suit, his presence immediately commanded respect. He sat at the head of the table, exuding calm confidence. The room was soon filled with eager candidates, all quirkless or those with obscure quirks, each with hope in their eyes. Aoidedu entered with a stack of files, a satisfied grin on his face. He informed Midoriya that all the candidates were present and ready for their interviews. Midoriya acknowledged Tedu's effort and signaled for them to begin. One by one, the candidates entered the room. Midoriya greeted each of them warmly, taking his time to understand their skills and aspirations. He wasn't just assessing their abilities, he was making them feel seen and valued. A young woman entered nervously, clutching her resume. She expressed her gratitude for the opportunity. Midoriya reassured her, stating he was just a person giving hard-working individuals the chance they deserved, and asked what inspired her. By the end of the interviews, the candidates left the room brimming with gratitude. Many expressed their thanks, unable to believe someone cared enough to give them this chance. One man shook Midoriya's hand firmly, acknowledging the incredible opportunity they had been given. Midoriya's eyes softened as he welcomed them to the team, affirming that everyone deserved a fair chance. Later that day, Midoriya stood in his private office, going over some plans when Nagant entered, carrying a folder filled with instructions. She inquired if he needed her assistance. Midoriya leaned back in his chair and explained that he needed her to handle something discreetly involving the HPSC president. He slid a paper and a phone across the desk, detailing the president's home location and contact information. Nagant raised an eyebrow, asking what exactly he wanted her to do. Midoriya explained that the president kept her phone near the window and instructed her to wait for the right moment to act. He mentioned that his men would arrive afterward to cover the scene, emphasizing that it would be good for business and that justice would be served. Nagant nodded, maintaining her professional demeanor, and asked if there was anything else. Midoriya produced a small drive from his pocket, containing information about the HPSC's corrupt dealings. He instructed her to give it to his reporter once she was finished, wanting the world to know the truth. She accepted the drive, curious about his own plans. Midoriya smirked, revealing he had unfinished business with Aldra Junior High, indicating it was time for some old acquaintances to learn a lesson. As she left the room, Midoriya stared out the window, his mind filled with plans. He wasn't just building a media empire, he was reshaping the world, one move at a time. That night, Nagant stood perched on a rooftop overlooking the HPSC president's lavish building, her sniper rifle in hand. She waited silently, her eyes focused on the target's window, as instructed by Midoriya. The phone number he provided was dialed, and the sound of ringing echoed faintly through her earpiece. Inside, the president approached her phone, which lay near the open window, and answered curtly. Nagant smirked as she whispered her ominous message. Before the president could react, she pulled the trigger. The silenced shot rang out, precise and lethal. The president's body collapsed to the floor. Down below, reporters affiliated with Midoriya's news company were already positioned. As instructed, Nagant tossed a small USB drive containing incriminating evidence of the HPSC's corrupt deeds down to them. The reporters, wearing discreet disguises, quickly began capturing the scene while maintaining their cover. Nagant ensured her face was covered before disappearing into the shadows, leaving no trace of her presence. At Midoriya's company headquarters, he leaned back in his chair, watching the live feed on the large screen in the meeting room. A sly grin spread across his face as he observed the scene unfold. He remarked that the plan went off without a hitch and addressed his team, instructing them to prepare for their first breaking news story. The HPSC president was dead, and they were about to air all the organization's dirty laundry. His employees scrambled to action, preparing the broadcast. Midoriya continued, his voice steady but commanding, instructing them to broadcast immediately and to use the footage from the scene along with everything on the drive. They were not holding back. As the newsroom buzzed with activity, Midoriya adjusted his tie and turned to Chad, his loyal bodyguard. He informed Chad that he would be heading out soon and instructed him to ensure the next steps of the plan were ready, indicating he had personal business to settle with Aldra and the people there. Chad nodded firmly in acknowledgement. Midoriya stepped out of the room, a satisfied smirk playing on his lips, ready for the next phase of his grand design. Meanwhile, in a dark room lit only by the faint glow of a single overhead bulb, Izuku stood before a cracked mirror, his reflection barely visible through the scratches on its surface. The air was heavy, filled with the metallic scent of tools and the faint aroma of oil. This was no ordinary room. It was where Izuku prepared himself to become the force justice demanded. On the table before him lay an assortment of items. A pristine white coat, torn and stained as if it had seen countless battles. A black shirt, tailored to cling tightly to his frame, gloves splattered with fake blood, and a mask resembling the twisted visage of his terrifying persona. To the side were files, photos, and documents of his targets, carefully studied to ensure none would escape his judgment. Izuku slid the coat over his shoulders, the fabric heavy yet familiar. He glanced at his reflection, his emerald eyes glinting with cold determination. He reached for the mask, running his fingers along its jagged edges. It was a symbol, something they would remember, something they would fear. He placed the mask over his face, the world shifting as his vision adjusted to the darkened lenses. He pulled on the gloves, the fake blood smearing across his hands, creating the illusion of carnage. Izuku reached for a jar filled with a thick, dark liquid and smeared it along his hairline, transforming his usual wild green locks into a deep, unrecognizable shade. The transformation was almost complete. He thought about embodying what they feared, his voice cold and emotionless as he turned to the mannequin in the corner, draped in an outfit eerily similar to his own. It stood as a reminder of the facade he had created, a visual representation of the terror he would unleash. Izuku stepped back, taking in his reflection once more. The figure staring back at him was no longer Izuku Midoriya. It was something darker, born from the pain and injustice he had endured. He adjusted the collar of his coat and clenched his fists, murmuring to himself about justice and what they deserved. With one final glance, he turned and left the room, his steps purposeful. The tools, the mask, and the persona he had crafted would ensure his enemies saw not the boy they once tormented, but the reckoning they could never escape. Later, in Aldra, the room was dark, save for the faint glow of a single, swinging light bulb that cast eerie shadows on the walls. The former students and staff of Aldra Junior High stood huddled together, fear etched into their faces. The air was thick with tension, an unshakable sense of dread creeping into their bones. Izuku Midoriya stepped out of his sleek black car and approached a dimly lit apartment building in the rundown side of the city. The place reeked of despair, the crumbling walls and broken windows telling tales of shattered dreams. Clad in his usual dark attire, Izuku's footsteps echoed in the desolate corridor as he made his way to the room he had been informed about. With a casual knock on the creaky wooden door, he waited. A sharp, irritated voice called from within, inviting him in. Izuku pushed the door open and entered. Inside, he found a woman sitting on a worn-out couch with a bottle of whiskey in her hand. Her sharp feline-like features and the spotted tail behind her gave her away. This was the woman known as Cheetah, once a top graduate from UA High School. Her reputation had been legendary, her speed and instincts unmatched. But now, her surroundings and demeanor painted a tragic picture of a fallen hero. Izuku noted her surprise at seeing someone as serious as him in a place like this, and before he could say more, Cheetah was on him in a flash, her claws pressed lightly against his neck. Her amber eyes glared at him with suspicion, her movements precise and controlled. She warned him to talk fast or he would regret stepping into her territory. Unfazed, Izuku raised his hands in mock surrender, assuring her he wasn't there to cause trouble. In fact, he was there to offer her something that might change her life. Cheetah narrowed her eyes but removed her claws, stepping back cautiously. She slumped onto the couch, grabbed the bottle of whiskey, and took a long swig, giving him 2 minutes to make his pitch. Izuku walked further into the room, his gaze scanning the broken furniture and the peeling wallpaper. He spoke about her past, recalling how she had been the top of her class at UA, a hero destined for greatness. But then, the hero commission had turned its back on her.